I've had enough. I hate to ask, but can I stay at your place for a few days? My dad stood at my door, looking defeated. My sisters and mom had kicked him out of the house. Seeing my once strong father talk about reaching his limit made me feel responsible. I couldn't help but blame myself. I'm sorry, Dad, I said, trying to apologize for not being able to ease his pain. But before I could say more, my husband Ethan spoke up. Let's have your dad live with us. Are you sure? I asked, surprised. Even my dad was shocked, his eyes wide. My name is Emily. I'm 26 years old. Ethan and I started dating in college, and we've been married for 2 years. We have a good balance between work and home, and Ethan has always been my biggest supporter. He gives me confidence, and I feel lucky to be with him. I'm the youngest of 3 sisters. Growing up, I always felt like I couldn't stand up to my mom or sisters. I was often ignored and treated as the least important. Whenever I shared my thoughts, I would get harsh comments in return. So eventually, I stopped speaking up. I hid my feelings and did whatever I was told without complaining. Mom often made hurtful comments like, I wanted a boy, but when I found out you were another girl, I was disgusted. Grace and Ashley are enough for girls. You're not wanted here, but if you want to stay, you have to work. Even when I wanted to respond, I stayed quiet, swallowing my words. By the time I was in elementary and middle school, I was doing most of the housework, cooking, laundry, and preparing baths. People around me would say things like, wow, that's impressive, or you're so responsible. At first, I liked the praise, but soon, it became a routine, and I stopped feeling proud. My mom never thanked me. Instead, she criticized my cooking or the way I folded laundry. The one person who kept me going was my dad. Unlike mom and my sisters, Dad loved and respected me. He was always there for me. As the only man in the family, my dad wasn't well liked by my mom and sisters. Like me, he had little power in the household, but no matter what, he always stood up for me. I'm sorry, Emily, you have to put up with so much. I wish we could all live in peace, Dad would say, holding me tight. Even though he worked long hours, he always spent his days off with me, helping fulfill my mom and sister's demands. He listened to me and cared about how I felt, but my mom and sisters didn't like that. They'd say things like, there's no one to protect you today, and make me do more chores. They'd throw harsh words at Dad, too, calling him things like low income and disgusting. My sisters would laugh and tell him, don't open your mouth. Even though Dad tried to support me, the constant mistreatment from my mom and sisters made me feel weaker over time. Seeing how much I was struggling, Dad said something to me when I started high school. Emily, study hard and go to college. Leave this house and live your own life. You have so many possibilities. You don't have to stay here forever, Dad urged. Hearing him say that made me feel both excited and nervous. At the time, my oldest sister Grace, 6 years older than me, was attending a private university. Ashley, 4 years older, was in vocational school. Mom would often mock Dad for not making enough money and would tell me, we're poor because he doesn't bring in enough. You should start working once you graduate high school. Because of that, I believed we were financially struggling, so when Dad told me to go to college, I worried he was pushing himself too hard, but Dad reassured me, saying, there's no need to worry about money. I feel responsible for making you suffer so much, and I don't want you to endure this any longer. Dad, I started, but he continued, this is a request from your father. Don't worry about anything, just go to the university you want, study what you love, and find your passion. I want you to live a happy life to make up for all the hardship you've gone through, Dad said, gripping my shoulder with tears in his eyes. His words were full of determination. From that moment, I focused on the studies I had neglected. Despite still following the strict orders of my mom and sisters, I spent all my remaining time at my desk, studying hard. My efforts paid off when I was accepted into a university. Dad and I hugged each other, full of joy over my achievement. I kept it a secret from my mom and sisters until the last minute. On the day I was moving out, I finally told them that I was going to college and living on my own. By that time, Grace had already moved out, leaving just Mom and Ashley at home. When they found out, they yelled at me in anger, but I endured their harsh words, and at last, I broke free from them. I kept my new mobile phone, a gift from Dad, hidden from them. I didn't tell them where I was going to university or where I was living. I stayed in touch with Dad, but I started a new life without any involvement with my mom or sisters. However, just because I escaped from them didn't mean my university life was easy. I wasn't used to speaking my mind, and being shy. I felt invisible in my classes and had trouble making friends. That's when Ethan reached out to me. "What do you think, Emily?" he asked one day. Ethan was bright, confident, and popular in the group, so I was shocked that he was speaking to me. I was already uncomfortable talking in front of others, and being put on the spot made me freeze. But Ethan pressed on. "You have thoughts, right? Share them. We won't know unless you speak up." At first, I thought Ethan was pushy and didn't care about how others felt, but over time, I saw his kindness and how he respected other people's opinions. Thanks to him, I started making friends. Soon enough, I found myself drawn to Ethan, and by our third year of university, we started dating. When I told Dad about Ethan, he was thrilled and congratulated me. He celebrated every milestone in my life: when I found a job, when Ethan and I moved in together, and when we decided to get married. Dad shared in my happiness as if it was his own. Even though I was happy, I was always worried about Dad. Since I had started university, I hadn't gone back home, and I hadn't seen him in person. We kept in touch, but I couldn't help but worry, knowing he was still living with Mom and my sisters. I was sure Dad was still dealing with cruel remarks from Mom and Ashley, and spending his days following their controlling demands. "Dad, I'm happy today because of everything you did for me. Back then, I was powerless and always needed your help. But things are different now. I have a job, I'm married, and I have someone who supports me. Now it's my turn to help you. Please, let me know if you ever need anything."
I told him this when I announced my marriage. Being with Ethan had taught me the importance of expressing my feelings, and I was finally able to say things to Dad that I couldn't before. He simply replied, "Thank you," but 2 years have passed since then, and Dad has never asked me for help. Recently, I heard that Grace, who had been living on her own, quit her job and moved back to our parents' house. This only made me worry more about Dad. One day, while I was telling Ethan how concerned I was, the doorbell rang. It was late December, and though it wasn't even 4 p.m., it was already getting dark outside. We weren't expecting any deliveries, so we were surprised when we looked at the intercom screen. The person on the camera was Dad. I rushed to the front door, and for the first time in 8 years, I saw him. His cheeks were sunken, and his hair had turned mostly white. He looked sick and frail. I instantly knew this wasn't just a casual visit. "Dad, what happened? Please come inside. It must be freezing out there," I said, noticing he was only wearing trousers and a long-sleeved shirt, far too light for December weather. The reason for his thin clothes soon became clear when Dad spoke. He told me he had been kicked out of the house by Mom and my sisters. They told me to go buy dessert, so I went to the convenience store, but when I came back, the house was locked. I asked them to let me in, but they told me not to come back. What? I was shocked. I left the house without my phone or jacket. Dad continued, rubbing his cold arms. I waited for hours, but they never let me in. Hearing this, I quickly made some hot tea and handed it to Dad, trying to help him warm up. Dad held the cup of tea with both hands, trying to warm up, and quietly said, "I might not be able to go back to that house again." "Why?" I asked, worried. "Ever since Grace came back, Mom and the others have been treating me even worse. I've been feeling like I'm at my limit, and now they've done this to me. I don't even have the energy to go back. I think I'll look for a small apartment and figure out what to do next," Dad explained. "I'm sorry, but could I stay here for a few days? I'll leave as soon as I find a place." I was shocked. I knew Dad had been struggling, but I didn't realize it was this bad. For the first time, Dad, who never complained, was talking about reaching his limit. "I'm sorry, Dad," I began, feeling guilty for knowing about his troubles but not being able to help. Before I could finish, Ethan spoke up. "Let's have your father live with us." "Are you sure?" I asked, surprised. Dad, equally shocked, widened his eyes. "Sorry to be blunt, but your father doesn't look well," Ethan continued. "I think it would be best if we all live together so he can recover. We can figure out everything else later, as long as he's okay with it." Dad and I were both filled with gratitude. That's how our new life as a trio began. Just a few days after Dad moved in, the doorbell rang again. The three of us were stunned when we saw who was on the intercom: Mom and my sisters. Why are they here? I thought, feeling a mix of shock and bitter memories, but I knew I had to face them, so I opened the door, panicking about what they might do next. "Wow, I didn't expect you to be living in such a fancy place," Mom said, looking around. "I thought you were scraping by in some rundown apartment." Hearing her voice after so long made me feel nothing but resentment. "Why are you here?" I asked. "Your father's phone had your address in it. I didn't even know Emily had a mobile phone. Why would you give him your contact info and not us? Are you honoring the wrong person?" Grace sneered, looking down at me. Mom, smiling as if satisfied, spoke again. "Never mind. Is your father here? We're having some trouble without him." Even though they said they were in trouble, none of them looked distressed. In fact, all three of them were smirking. "In trouble? You're the ones who kicked him out," I said. "You've gotten quite sassy, haven't you?" Mom snapped back. "So he is here. Move aside." "No," I firmly replied. I yelled at Mom and her group, my frustration rising. Mom's usual condescending remarks about me only made me angrier. In the past, I wouldn't have stood up to her, but I had changed, thanks to Ethan. Mom, irritated, raised her voice. "When did I give you permission to talk back? Just move. You can't even listen to what I say. I'm not the same person I used to be. I won't let you push me around anymore." "Mom," I responded firmly. Ethan stood beside me, trying to get Mom and my sisters to leave, but they wouldn't budge. We kept telling them to go, but they refused. Finally, tired of the back and forth, Mom gave up first. "Fine, I don't want to hear any more from you," she snapped. "If you won't move, at least tell us when the money will be deposited into our account. It's so annoying that all you can do is put money in, and you can't even do that properly." I was speechless. How did Mom think she had been able to live without working? My anger boiled over. "From now on, Dad will be living with us," I declared. "Neither of us will be pushed around by you anymore. You should divorce Dad and stop causing him pain." I couldn't hold back my words any longer, but Mom's response was unexpected. "Don't make it sound like I'm the bad guy," she yelled. "I've been kind enough to stay with a man who's low income and useless. You should be thanking me." "What?" I was stunned. "You're just like your father, a low-income loser," she continued. "You act high and mighty, but all you do is lick each other's wounds." I was on the verge of losing control, ready to lash out, but before I could say anything, Ethan spoke up. "Emily works hard. She's a supervisor and earns a good salary. I'd appreciate it if you didn't belittle us by saying we lick wounds," Ethan said, staring down my mom.
"Don't you dare talk back to me. You're an outsider, so stay out of this," Mom snapped at him. At that moment, Dad, who had been in the living room, appeared by my side. "I've heard enough," he said, addressing Mom. "We can't keep imposing on Emily and Ethan. Let's get a divorce." "Dad," I whispered, surprised. "That's fine," my sisters chimed in immediately. "We don't need a creepy guy like you," one of them shouted. Emboldened by my sisters, Mom agreed. "That's fine by me." I was shocked by how quickly it had been settled, but peace didn't last for long. "There's one condition," Mom added. "Hand over the house to me, and then I'll give you the divorce." I couldn't believe her greed, but Dad quickly agreed to her demand. "Dad, are you sure?" I asked, concerned. I was shocked when Dad smiled at me and said, "If that's all it takes to get a divorce, it's a small price to pay." Then, turning serious, he faced Mom and said, "I'll do as you ask. Leave for today. I'll come over tomorrow." With that, Dad sent Mom and my sisters home. They continued insulting me until the very end, but I didn't care anymore. I felt guilty for pushing Dad into getting a divorce and causing him to lose the family home, but Dad patted my shoulder and reassured me, "It's not your fault, Emily. I'm actually glad you spoke up." The next day, Dad went back home one last time with the divorce papers. He made Mom sign them, handled the paperwork, and packed his things. When he returned, he looked lighter, as if a burden had been lifted. Although it was sad to see the house go to Mom and my sisters, if Dad felt relieved, I was okay with it. A few months later, Dad told me what had happened to Mom and my sisters. They had taken the house in the divorce, planning to sell it and live lavishly. However, the house was old, in a poor location, and didn't sell for much. The costs of demolishing it ate up most of the money. In the end, they were left with almost nothing. Now, without a home or savings, they struggled. Mom didn't work, and neither Grace nor Ashley had stable jobs. With Dad gone, the same man they mocked for his low income, they had no one to lean on financially and found themselves in dire straits. They tried coming to our house for help, showing up several times, but we never opened the door. They wouldn't give up, causing a commotion on the porch. Eventually, I had to tell them through the intercom, "If you don't stop, I'll call the cops." That finally made them leave. Now they barely managed to rent a small apartment, too cramped for the three of them. Even Mom, who had never worked before, was forced to get a job out of desperation. Despite all the times they mocked Dad and me, they were now constantly arguing among themselves, blaming each other for their situation. It seems some people never change. Without Dad or me around, they turned on each other, destined to live in both physical and emotional poverty. Meanwhile, our lives have taken a completely different path. Despite all the mocking about Dad's low income, we found out after the divorce that he had been quietly trading stocks for years, building a fortune. He never mentioned it because he feared that Mom and my sisters would try to seize his assets, so he waited until the divorce was finalized. Now, we live comfortably in a new house Dad built with his wealth. He quit his job to focus on his stock investments. My husband and I are both working too, so we're financially stable. We support each other while maintaining our financial independence, and we're building the loving family that we couldn't have when we were younger.
I'm going to erase you from this world. Stay out of Dad's and my way. Mary's face, illuminated by the streetlights, was filled with rage. She slowly approached me, wildly waving the knife clutched in her hand. The night breeze blew, tousling our hair. "Stop, please!" I pleaded, but Mary wouldn't stop. I never thought a day like this would come. I thought I had been as cautious as possible, but now I found myself cornered. "Please, calm down. Don't you think Dad would be heartbroken if he knew about this?" "No, he wouldn't." "Heartbroken? Are you kidding me?" "He'd be thrilled." It seemed that no matter what I said to Mary, it was useless. Right now, all she could think about was killing me. Mary slowly approached me. I took one step back, then another. I couldn't stall any longer. The only thing left to do was to resist somehow. The moment I made up my mind, the rooftop door swung open with a loud bang. My name is Sarah, and I'm 40 years old. When I was diagnosed with endometriosis at the age of 20, my life changed dramatically. After having a hysterectomy, I could no longer have children of my own, and I spent days feeling depressed. I stopped dreaming about having a happy marriage with someone I loved, a vague hope I had harbored until then. "You did nothing wrong." My parents tried to console me. "It's the disease that's to blame. It's not the fault of the person who gets sick." But their words didn't reach me. I strongly blamed myself for losing my uterus. I felt like I had a fatal flaw as a woman. A turning point came when I was 38. A friend introduced me to a man. Anthony was a handsome businessman, 2 years older than me. "Sarah, if it's okay with you, would you consider dating me with the intention of getting married? Is someone like me really good enough?" "Actually, I've heard about your infertility. It doesn't bother me. Besides, I have a daughter who's about to start middle school." I had already heard from a friend that Anthony had a child. His wife had apparently fallen from the balcony of their high-rise apartment and passed away the year before last, in the fall. He felt that he needed a partner to share his life with, especially for the sake of his teenage daughter. It was with this in mind that Anthony had decided to remarry. I was thrilled at the prospect. Having my own family and becoming a parent seemed like a dream come true. After accepting his proposal and dating for about 6 months, I married Anthony. I was happy to have such a wonderful, hardworking husband. I remember feeling that way from the bottom of my heart. Anthony also seemed overjoyed to be married to me. The only one who wasn't happy was Mary. It was the same when we went to greet my relatives. Mary said something shocking that froze the atmosphere. Even without getting married, I was fine with just Dad and me. "Mary! How can you say something so rude again?" But that's how I really feel. This marriage is just a nuisance, you know? Mary's blunt attitude was bound to leave a bad impression. Please forgive her, she's at a difficult age. I tried to smooth things over. In fact, Mary was a tough daughter to handle. She had apparently been against Dad's remarriage all along. Don't you feel sorry for Mom in heaven? Mary would always blame Anthony. It was the same the day before we officially registered our marriage. As if I didn't even exist. Mom must be crying in heaven. You don't need to remarry. I can handle the housework myself. Why can't we just live as father and daughter? She screamed, giving Dad a hard time. I was perplexed too. If I wasn't welcome, I didn't want to get married. If Anthony hadn't strongly pursued me, I probably would have turned him down. Mary's going to be busy with school from now on. I want you to focus on your club activities too. I want you to cherish your own time without worrying about the house. That's why. You're remarrying for that reason. Then why not just hire a housekeeper or something? It's for Dad's sake too. I want a partner to share my life with, for the long road ahead. Sarah agreed to marry me feeling the same way. Please understand. Anthony pleaded, but Mary just puffed out her cheeks in dissatisfaction. She really seemed to dislike my presence. I remember feeling incredibly uncomfortable. Would we really be able to get along as a family in the future? I was filled with anxiety. Living with a teenage girl requires a lot of care and attention. I realized that painfully and felt more than a little regret. Mary was even more difficult to handle than I had imagined. She ignored my greetings. She wouldn't respond when I tried to talk to her. And she often glared at me, with a terrifyingly scary look in her eyes. I heard Anthony scold her countless times when he couldn't stand it anymore. Mary, stop glaring like that. She's your mom, after all. Whose mom? My mom is in heaven. Are you saying that again? I suppose that may be true, but... It's okay, Anthony. It is the truth. Don't blame Mary. I think we can gradually come to understand each other. We have plenty of time, after all. It was too naive to think we could hit it off right away. If I were in my daughter's position, how would I feel? If I wanted to improve our relationship, I had no choice but to take my time. I made up my mind and decided not to dwell on it even when Mary was cold to me. Even when she looked at me with hostile eyes, even when she complained to my face, I endured it with a smile. Mary's strong-willed nature was the real deal. She would get competitive with me at every turn. She tried to outdo me in every way, from cooking skills to cleaning efficiency. Hey Dad, look at the omelet I made. It's way better than a certain someone's, right? By a certain someone, do you mean Mom? Mary, I told you to stop trying to compare like that, didn't I? There's no point in comparing. Why? I'm proving that we'd be fine without this person around. Why can't you understand that? You're so stubborn, Dad. Mary. Stop pointing at Mom and calling her this person. Mary was still in middle school. It was only natural for her to be emotionally unstable at times. Getting angry or reacting emotionally was out of the question. I needed to handle this like an adult and take my time to get closer to her. I told Anthony that whenever an issue came up, I'll be fine, so don't worry. I assured him. It must have been about 6 months after we got married. A big change came. Mary started smiling at me. Where did that sharp, hostile look in her eyes go? She would come up to me with a smile. Good morning, Mom. And she'd say. My feelings had finally gotten through to her. I was genuinely happy. But it didn't take long for me to realize that her kindness was only superficial. "Mom, I'll help you prepare dinner too. Can I cut the carrots into small pieces?" "Sure, thanks. We're making stew, so cut the carrots a bit larger." "Oh. Oops, sorry. My hand slipped." "It's okay. Just make sure to grip the knife tightly." The knife had slipped out of Mary's hand and come flying towards me. I barely managed to dodge it, but one wrong move and I could have been seriously injured. Other times, kitchen scissors fell on my foot, or I almost got splashed with boiling water. I wanted to pat myself on the back for escaping unscathed. The worst was when I noticed something off about my drink. One holiday, when I was about to drink the coffee Mary had made for me, I smelled a distinctive citrusy scent. "Huh? This is... Hey, Anthony. Don't you think this coffee smells weird? We didn't change the beans, did we?" You're right, it does smell strange. But the one I'm drinking is fine." "Oh, sorry. It's probably my fault. I might have poured the coffee into Mom's cup without rinsing it properly after washing it. I'll brew a new one right away." "Oh, it's okay. Thanks, Mary. I can make it myself, don't worry." "Oh, really?" Mary said with a smile. But to me, that smile looked somehow sinister. Mary had likely mixed detergent into my coffee. It couldn't have just been a case of forgetting to rinse. She must have been disappointed that I didn't take a single sip. I was constantly on edge, not knowing what Mary might do to me. Sometimes I just wanted to be alone and give my mind a rest. One Saturday afternoon, I walked into my favorite cafe. I was happy to be married, but spending every day with Mary was too mentally draining. Anthony being on my side was my only saving grace. How long would these days go on? As I sipped my coffee, lost in thought, I sighed again and again. I'm not sure how long I sat there like that. Before I knew it, a customer had taken a seat behind the partition. The voice sounded an awful lot like Mary's, and I couldn't help but prick up my ears. It's just the worst. Nothing I do works out. I want to get the better of her just once. I wonder why. Maybe it's because I keep failing. Don't rush, Mary. These things take patience. Always smile and lure your opponent into letting their guard down. Take your time and do it carefully. Let's open Dad's eyes. You're right. Absolutely. Thanks, Linda. There was no mistake. One of them was Mary. But who was this Linda person? Judging from her voice, she seemed to be an adult woman. Thanks to the partition, the two hadn't noticed my presence. The content of their conversation was truly terrifying. They were discussing specific ways to drive me to divorce. If I continued this marriage, my life could be in danger. I should get a divorce right away. They were trying to make me think that somehow involuntarily propose a divorce. That night, when Anthony and I were alone, I talked to him about Mary and this woman named Linda. And that's the story. Anthony, do you know anything about someone named Linda? Linda? I hate to think it, but... Anthony seemed to have an idea. He turned pale upon hearing the contents of their conversation. I'll try to casually ask her about it. Anthony promised me. Anyway, we have to avoid anything that could put Sarah's life in danger. Be as careful as possible around knives, things you put in your mouth, high places, walking on the street, things like that. Yeah, I will. It'd be scary if something happened. At the same time, I decided to investigate the other person on my own. I couldn't just sit back and take it. I had to be proactive in protecting myself. If something were to happen to me, there was a possibility that Mary and this Linda woman could become criminals. Linda aside, I wanted to protect Mary. That was my maternal instinct. A few days after that conversation, I got a message from Anthony saying, "I have to work late." Then, after dinner, Mary invited me up to the rooftop. Apparently, she had heard from a friend that we could see a meteor shower tonight.
We can see a meteor shower? I haven't heard anything about that. There don't seem to be any articles about it on news sites either. Let's just go and see. The rooftop of this high-rise condo is finally open to residents. It'd be a waste not to go. Right.
Unable to refuse her forceful invitation, I headed to the rooftop with Mary. The city lights from the 25th floor looked beautiful, even on an ordinary night. But I didn't let my guard down. I had to be careful around high places. I tried to stay as far away from the fence as possible. Then, Mary gradually grew impatient.
Mom, come over here. The night view from here is really gorgeous too. Thanks. But I'm fine, I can see it well from here. Hey, I'm telling you to come here. Don't you get it?
Mary's voice lowered. Before I knew it, Mary was holding a knife in her hand. She spread her arms wide and slowly approached me. The Mary who had transformed discarded her fake kindness and revealed her true nature.
I'm going to erase you from this world. Stay out of Dad's and my way.
The night breeze blew, tousling our hair. Mary's face, illuminated by the streetlights, was filled with rage.
Stop, please.
No matter how much I pleaded, Mary wouldn't stop.
Please calm down. Don't you think Dad would be heartbroken if he knew about this? No, he wouldn't. Heartbroken? Are you kidding me? He'd be thrilled.
It seemed that no matter what I said to Mary, it was useless. Right now, all she could think about was killing me. Mary slowly approached me. I took one step back, then another. I couldn't stall any longer. The only thing left to do was to resist somehow. The moment I made up my mind, the rooftop door swung open with a loud bang.
Stop it, Mary! Get away from Sarah! Dad! How did you?
I had actually texted Anthony that Mary had invited me to the rooftop. Her behavior was unusual, and going somewhere high up was far too dangerous.
I'll be home soon, so don't let your guard down,
he had replied. Anthony came running over and stood behind me.
Move!
Mary screamed. The tip of the knife was shaking. Her eyes were crazed. She charged at us, knife raised overhead. While shielding me, Anthony caught Mary as she swung the knife around and pushed her towards the fence. And then, to our shock, the fence came loose with a small clatter.
Ah! No! Mary!
It all happened in an instant. Mary, falling into the darkness below. The merciless sound of impact echoing through the high-rise condo's garden. We immediately called the police and an ambulance. But sadly, Mary couldn't be saved. Anthony, though clearly in agony, fulfilled his role as the family representative admirably. Many people rushed to attend Mary's funeral, friends, teachers, and more. Mary, who was always cheerful, frank, and popular at school. I deeply regretted not being able to save Mary before she lost her sanity. About a week after Mary's funeral, I called Linda to meet me at a cafe. She seemed surprised to hear from me. Of course she would be. No one would expect to get a call directly from a colleague's wife. That's right, this Linda who had been secretly encouraging Mary was Anthony's coworker. When Linda arrived right on time.
Nice to meet you.
I greeted her with a simple, Mary seemed to be very close with you while she was alive. Huh? Oh, my condolences. She still had so much ahead of her, it's just… Yes, it's tragic. A fall from 100 meters up. Apparently the wire fence had come unhooked and the bolts on the posts had come loose. That fence Mary had leaned her weight against that day. It had been rigged to come off with just a bit of force. And not just in one spot, it seems the fences all across the rooftop were in that dangerous state. Mary must have been trying to corner me against that fence while threatening me with a knife. And by some cruel twist of fate, she ended up being the one to lean on the broken fence. It was truly a nightmarish event. You're the one who tampered with the fences on that rooftop, aren't you, Linda? What? How could I have? I'm an outsider. I can't get into the building. Couldn't Mary have let you in? It'd be easy to get in then, right? You were conspiring with Mary to kill me. Isn't that right? Come clean and tell me everything. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't go accusing me. Who do you think you are? Isn't this a bit rude to say to someone you just met? You're out of line. Linda was defiant. She denied ever even meeting with Mary. She claimed that she had only heard about her a few times from Anthony, and had never directly interacted with Mary herself. How dishonest. It had to be a lie. I clearly remembered Linda's voice as she spoke with Mary. Stop spouting nonsense. You met with Mary many times. You advised her, encouraged her, didn't you? Telling her to try threatening me with a knife, to try putting detergent in my coffee. You were trying to psychologically corner me into filing for divorce, weren't you? Can you please stop? I don't know anything. If you don't cut it out, I'll call the police. Go ahead, call them. And while you're at it, confess that you're deeply involved in Mary's death. Do you really think I'm saying this without knowing anything? I called you here after thoroughly investigating you. Investigated me? Linda had feelings for Anthony. This was revealed by the detective I hired. Information from several of Linda's colleagues confirmed it. After Anthony's first wife passed away, Linda aimed to become his new wife. Unfortunately for Linda, I became the second wife instead. Frustrated, Linda secretly approached Mary, trying to win her over first. She noticed the darkness in Mary's heart and gave her advice to get rid of me. But in the end, Mary's plans backfired and she took her own life. Isn't that right? No, it's not. I had nothing to do with it. Stop accusing me. Nothing to do with it? Stop lying. It's all written in Mary's diary. Linda, it details the advice you gave her. A diary? What are you talking about? Mary kept a diary. I think it's only natural for Linda to be surprised. Even Anthony and I didn't know she had one. It detailed her meetings and conversations with Linda. Anthony and I found the diary while sorting through her belongings and were shocked. Linda's instructions were specific and horrifying. Telling her to put foreign objects in our food is not something a sane person would advise. Moreover, the cafe's security cameras should have recorded you meeting with Mary. Matching the diary's dates will increase the credibility. The police will see that you advised Mary multiple times, trying to corner me. Please, don't call the police. Why not? Weren't you the one who suggested it? Mary's diary also mentioned the day Linda was invited to our condo. The two of them took time to tamper with the fence, planning my fall. That alone makes Linda's actions criminal. It's a case of property damage. The penalties for property damage include long-term imprisonment or hefty fines. When I explained this to Linda, she turned pale. You encouraged Mary to commit a crime. You must acknowledge that. Because of you, Mary ended up losing her life, and you can't deny your responsibility. But I just gave advice. I didn't actually do anything, so I can't be responsible. Have you heard of incitement? It's not just the person who commits the crime, but also the one who persuades or guides them to do it who is culpable. They face the same penalties as the perpetrator. I thought pushing her this far would make her confess. But I was wrong. Linda was surprisingly persistent. She denied having any interactions with Mary about committing crimes. That diary is full of lies. I never talked to Mary about anything illegal. I swear. I was just giving her advice about her love life. Love life? What do you mean? Mary was in love. I was just supporting her. I never discussed any crimes like the diary says. Really? Can you swear that's the absolute truth? It's the truth. Linda insisted. She said Mary was in love with a boy from her school. This was the first I heard of it. It was obviously a lie. Linda was so naive. She didn't understand how cornered she really was. If she thought Mary's diary was the only evidence we had, she was sorely mistaken. I fiddled with my phone and played a recording of Mary's voice. Failed again. That old hag is really sensitive to smells. I put bleach in her coffee, but she threw it out right away. So annoying. Yeah, the first time you put detergent in the coffee and failed, it made her suspicious. You need to be more careful next time. It was a conversation between Linda and Mary. Linda's face showed pure shock. She couldn't believe such a recording existed. She had no idea we had investigated her so thoroughly. I hired a private investigator to look into every detail about you. Linda, what did you just say? That you never discussed any crimes with Mary, right? Well, that might have been a lapse in memory. A lapse in memory? How do you confuse talking about putting bleach and detergent in coffee? Please, explain. Well, we talked about removing coffee stains. I guess the memories got mixed up. Linda's pathetic excuses infuriated me. Her deceit was infuriating. Linda had pushed Mary over the edge. Her guilt was enormous. Even if the world forgave her, Anthony and I never would. At that moment, a shadow appeared silently. Someone stood right behind Linda. A deep, ominous voice made Linda flinch. You lying woman! You are definitely partly to blame for Mary's death. Do you understand that? I will hate you forever, Linda. I will never forgive you. Never. Anthony! How long have you been there? No, it's not what you think, Linda turned around, her face turning pale. She saw Anthony's exhausted face. It was no wonder he looked so worn out. After all, he lost his daughter right in front of him. And it was triggered by his own contact with her. No amount of regret could ever be enough. Even after the funeral, Anthony continued to suffer. He had nightmares every night. He seemed to relive the moment he lost his precious daughter over and over in his dreams. Sitting beside me, Anthony looked up at Linda. Linda, do you have any idea what it feels like for a parent to lose their child right in front of them? Anthony! I'm so sorry. Sorry isn't going to cut it. Do you think saying sorry will make everything okay? Give me back Mary. We had our problems, but she was still my daughter. Anthony already knew Linda had tampered with the fence. If it weren't for that, Mary might still be alive today. And if she were alive, maybe we could have eventually reconciled. But that possibility was taken away from our family. Thinking about Anthony's pain, I couldn't stop my own tears. Linda, I deeply regret ever introducing you to Mary. If that hadn't happened, she wouldn't have kept in touch with you. I'm sorry. I'm sick of hearing apologies. Can't you say something more meaningful? I don't know how to apologize properly. I'm sorry. All she could do was beg for forgiveness. Linda was finally retracting her excuses and admitting her involvement. Just in case, I quietly started the voice recorder app on my phone. Do you understand how much I have suffered? Sure, my wife and Mary didn't get along. But we were trying to resolve it in our own way. Yes. I understand. I really do. Understand? That's rich. You meddled in another family's issues and made things worse with your words. You caused the worst possible outcome. Yes. Anthony, you're right. Linda started to cry softly, looking down and sniffling. Tears ran down her cheeks. Linda herself seemed to be perplexed by this incident. It was a little late, but I could sense that from her demeanor. I loved you. I loved Anthony. What did you say? I loved Anthony. I wanted to marry you. But you chose someone else, not me. That made me so angry. So, you decided to destroy our family? That's horrible. You're so selfish. When you love someone, you should want them to be happy. Linda started crying again. It was understandable after being harshly criticized by the person she loved. I felt my role here was done. There was no new testimony to gain. I urged Linda to go to the police. I will, she said, nodding while crying. After that, Linda turned herself in at the police station. She was later fined for criminal property damage and other charges. We also filed a claim for damages against Linda. Losing Mary caused us immense emotional pain. Linda needed to make amends for her role in that. When questioned by the police, Linda admitted to her connection with Mary and their shared goal of getting rid of me. Mary's diary and the investigators' findings backed up Linda's words. If Linda and Mary had been bolder and more ruthless, who knows what might have happened to me? They could have hired someone to attack me or used other methods. No matter how cautious I was, I couldn't avoid all dangers. I felt incredibly lucky to be alive. A few days later, Linda resigned from her job for personal reasons. Apparently, she couldn't stand the cold stares from her colleagues. Linda, now in debt from the damages, spent her days repaying it. She currently works part-time at a grocery store in a small town in South Carolina. Mary's obsessive attachment to Dad and her hostility towards me became clearer. Anthony found a theory that seemed to explain it. Mary likely had an Electra complex. Anthony sighed. An Electra complex? What is that? Is it a disease? It's not a disease. It's when a young girl feels exclusive love for her dad and develops strong rivalry with her mom. Mary might have had an extreme case of it. That makes a lot of sense. An Electra complex. It describes a psychological state, not a mental illness. Anthony emphasized that point. Even I have a normal amount of affection for Dad. In Mary's case, she must have unknowingly let those feelings escalate. It's something that could happen to anyone. That child did nothing wrong. I prayed once again for Mary's soul. Surprisingly, it was my relatives who actively supported Anthony's heart after losing Mary. Anthony's actions in trying to protect me, his wife, were completely justified. They affirmed the wounded Anthony wholeheartedly, saying those words. They even encouraged him about pushing Mary, saying it was self-defense. I believe it's precisely because of such support from those around him that Anthony was able to recover to how he is now. Anthony and I now spend peaceful days together, just the two of us. The wounds in our hearts may never heal completely. But it's because we're like this that it's important to be conscious of supporting each other. There will likely be many painful things in the future too, but as a married couple, we want to join our strength and overcome them. We want to protect each other's hearts so that we can smile as much as possible. That's what I believe. You cheated on me, didn't you? My husband Tom was holding our newborn baby and shouted right in front of me. I had just finished the huge task of giving birth and returned to my hospital room, and that's what my husband said to me. What are you talking about? I had absolutely no idea what he meant. I've been faithful to Tom since before we got married, and I have no reason to do something like that after getting married. I couldn't understand why he would say such a thing, and I was furious that he would say that to his wife right after giving birth. This baby's eyes are blue. You cheated on me with a foreigner, didn't you? That's impossible! I yelled back without thinking. I retorted while enduring the pain in my body. Tom quickly put the baby in the bassinet, as if he had touched something dirty. I was angry that he reacted that way to our own child. I picked the baby back up. The baby suddenly opened its eyes. They were clear blue eyes, like glass. How? Both Tom and I have brown eyes. I've never seen eyes this blue before. I really didn't cheat on you. I have no idea why this happened. Don't lie. There's no other explanation except that you cheated. I'm telling you, it's not possible. I really don't know why. I gave birth to this child myself, so there's no doubt it's my baby. I've never heard of any foreigners in my or Tom's family. If that's the case, I truly don't understand why this child has blue eyes. Please, let's do a DNA test. A DNA test should prove this child's relationship to Tom. When I desperately pleaded, Tom stared at me intently. If this child isn't yours, I'll divorce you. I'll even pay alimony. But I really have no idea how this happened. This is your child. Please, just let me prove it. Tom's voice echoed in the silent hospital room. His answer was, My name is Sophie. I'm turning 29 this year. I work an office job at a company in Boston. I was born in the South, but I've lived in Boston ever since I got into college. I'm married to Tom, who is 1 year older than me, and we live together. Tom works at a sports equipment company. Having grown up in a snowy area, I joined the ski club as soon as I started college. Tom was an upperclassman in the club at the time. He wasn't as used to snow as I was. But he loves sports and got hooked on skiing during a high school trip, so he went to ski resorts whenever he had the chance after that. He's quite skilled. Tom and I hit it off right away, since we both wanted to improve our skiing techniques. We always participated in the club's ski trips together, so naturally we started spending more time together and got closer. Then 6 months later, Tom said he wanted to date me seriously. That's how we became a couple, and our relationship progressed smoothly after that. After graduating, we both started working in Boston. I had become a working adult 1 year earlier. I moved into Tom's apartment and we started living together. Of course, the reason we chose to live together was that we wanted to be with each other. But that wasn't the only reason. Before graduating, we had discussed that we wanted to get married eventually, so establishing a financial foundation came first. If I lived in Tom's place, we could put all the rent money into savings instead. That way we could save up for our wedding faster. With that in mind, we cut back on ski trips until we had enough saved up. Eventually, Tom and I both gained more work experience and felt like we could continue our jobs long term. We reached our savings goal. Thrilled that we could finally get married, we decided to meet each other's parents first. My parents live far away, so both of us would need to take time off to visit them. Inevitably, we ended up going to Tom's parents' place first. Actually, Tom had only recently told his parents about dating me. Apparently they're old-fashioned and believe unmarried couples should keep their relationship pure. It's a very traditional area, so my parents don't approve of premarital relationships until the future is decided. My hometown is rural too, so I get it. Times have changed, but it can't be helped. That's why they think you and I are still living separately. If they ask, just go along with that. We had this conversation and firmly swore to absolutely never reveal that we were already living together before heading to Tom's parents' house. Tom's family runs a small woodworking business, with a factory located next to their home. The factory was originally started by Tom's grandfather, and his father-in-law Dylan is now the second-generation owner. They employ a handful of skilled craftsmen who create custom furniture and interior decor pieces using locally sourced wood. Although it's a small operation, they have long-standing business relationships with companies dating back to Tom's grandfather's days, so while it's not an easy business, they seem to be doing relatively well compared to others in the same trade. When I was a kid, Dad always told me, "Tom, you're going to take over as the boss one day, so start learning the ropes now." I was constantly made to help out at the factory. So when I decided to go to college, Dad wasn't happy about it. Has Dylan decided who will take over the factory after him? No, the craftsmen we have now are skilled but have zero interest in the business side of things. We've tried training younger workers, but no one sticks around long. I think Dad still hopes I'll come back and take over. Do you have any intentions of coming back here in the future, Tom? No way. I enjoy my current job that allows me to be involved with skiing. If I ever change careers, it would have to be something ski-related or I definitely wouldn't last. I was relieved to hear there was no chance of Tom taking over his family's factory. Inheriting the business would inevitably mean I'd be expected to support him and put down roots in that area too. I couldn't imagine living in an unfamiliar place, having to tiptoe around my seemingly old-fashioned parents-in-law. During that first visit to Tom's family home, I came face to face with Tom's parents, who would soon officially become my parents-in-law. We were shown to the living room where I deeply bowed my head to them. I'm sure I have many shortcomings, but I will do my best to support Tom. I hope for your kind guidance for many years to come. Yes, of course. I had pondered my words for days and even practiced, but my mother-in-law Caddy simply brushed them off. It was a bit anticlimactic. Still, at least Caddy had replied. Dylan stayed sullenly silent without a word, making me worried I had somehow angered him. But then Tom immediately started a normal conversation, so I figured these two must always be this distant. By the way, Sophie, what do you do for work? It was the first time Caddy properly spoke to me. I had expected her to ask about my upbringing or hometown at a time like this, so it threw me off that her first question was about my job. Nevertheless, I explained that I work an office job. And about how much do you make annually? She followed up, leaving me momentarily at a loss for words. Is that really something you suddenly ask your son's fiancé? Tom quickly interjected. That's not something you ask so bluntly, and warned his mother for me. But even after that, they peppered me with rather blatant questions at every turn, like the rent for the place I live now, and how much property and assets my parents own. Honestly, it was exhausting to field what felt like an interrogation into my and my family's financial situation. I snuck a glance at Tom beside me, who was sending me an apologetic look. Given that Tom's family has made their living running a factory for generations, perhaps they have very strict views about money. The barrage of questions earlier may have been their way of ascertaining whether I or any of my relatives are in debt. And if so, whether there was any risk of their son getting dragged into it. Maybe he wanted to confirm something like that. If they're just concerned about their son being suddenly saddled with a huge debt after marriage, I guess I can understand their perspective to some extent. At the time, I tried not to dwell on it too much. As soon as Caddy finished her spiel, Dylan opened his mouth as if he'd been waiting for his cue. Well then, why don't you go ahead and take a tour of the factory right away? His words caught me off guard. Just when I thought Dylan had finally deigned to speak to me, he's suggesting a factory tour out of the blue. Of course, it's his future son-in-law's family business, and I should probably have some idea of what it entails. But I can still hear the sound of machinery operating in the factory even now. Surely they don't expect me to go introduce myself to the employees on the spot like this, do they? The thought made me a bit nervous. You don't have to remember everything all at once. As Dylan started to stand up while saying this, Tim stopped him. Both of you, cut it out already. We came today with the intention of just making introductions. There's no need to show her the factory, is there? Besides, what do you mean she doesn't have to remember it all at once? When she doesn't have to remember anything at all? Chastened by Tim's forceful tone, Dylan reluctantly sat back down. Tim was absolutely right. It was clear from Dylan's choice of words that he was assuming I would eventually support Tim in taking over the factory. Apparently, Dylan still harbors hopes of having Tim inherit the business. At this point, I was starting to feel a very distinct sense of wariness towards these in-laws. Showing such blatant interest in my financial situation upon first meeting, and scheming from the start to tie me to the family factory that goes beyond just being tactless, in my opinion. This is a bit of an unbelievable situation. I understand that marrying Tim means inevitably being connected to these people. But I was realizing with stark clarity that having a close relationship with them in my daily life would be impossible. Sensing the increasingly tense atmosphere, Tim stepped in. Any further discussion can wait until we meet again. With that, he wrapped things up and we were done. As we were about to leave, Caddy was trying to tell Tim something in a low voice while walking with us. Tim was clearly exasperated as he dealt with her. And so, I was finally able to get away from Tim's family home. I found out later that Caddy's parting complaint to him were, "Just because you're married doesn't mean you should become distant from your family. Make sure you think carefully and visit home." It seemed like a pretty blatant guilt trip, but from Caddy's perspective, maybe she feels a sense of loneliness, as if I've stolen Tim away from her. But Tim seems exhausted by both Dylan pressuring him to take over the factory and Caddy constantly demanding excessive family time. He clearly has no desire to see them frequently. Of course, it's not like their relationship is hostile. Quirks aside, I'm sure Tim's parents act this way because they care about him. And Tim himself doesn't seem to want to stir up discord with them either. I wanted to respect Tim's feelings too. However, after talking to them for the first time today, I knew with absolute certainty that I couldn't handle a life with frequent meddling from those in-laws. I told Tim my honest feelings. I even conveyed that if there was any possibility of living with those two, it might make marriage itself difficult. Of course I love Tim, but I'm convinced that I'd be unable to maintain my peace of mind living together with those people. My parents can be unintentionally overbearing with their opinions sometimes, so it's totally understandable that you feel that way, Sophie. That's what Tim said. I'm not considering ever living with them long term. And I absolutely won't let our lives get so intertwined that you end up dealing with their interference, Sophie. He promised. I didn't want to reconsider my decision to get married, so I was truly relieved when he said that. However, even though we refrained from contacting them, my in-laws didn't do the same. Immediately after the greetings, my in-laws started making various proposals and demands to us. The most troublesome thing was their meddling in our wedding plans. Tim is our only son and he's precious to us, so we want you to have the wedding in the way that has been passed down in this family for generations. They kept insisting persistently. From an early stage, Tim and I had planned to have the wedding ceremony in a church and the reception as a small-scale event with only close relatives and friends. But Tim's parents even demanded that we hold the ceremony in their hometown. Furthermore, when they said we should make the reception bigger so they could invite many of their relatives, I felt anger welling up inside me. I don't want them interfering with our important ceremony. I told Tim that I wanted him to make them stop meddling any further. Of course, Tim felt the same way I did, but he looked pained being caught between his parents and me, so this time I decided to yield. Considering our life after marriage, I told my in-laws that we wanted to postpone the ceremony until we could save up a bit more money so we wouldn't use up all our savings on just the wedding, and smoothed things over for the moment. And so, our married life started while postponing the ceremony. I told my colleagues at work and friends that we decided to use the money for the reception on our daily life instead. Most of our acquaintances of the same generation agreed it was a more rational and better choice. For me, it was disappointing not being able to have a wedding ceremony, but I was very happy that we could officially submit the marriage registration and become husband and wife. And finally, our married life began. We were already living together, but living with a clear perspective on how we would overcome the rest of our lives together felt very fresh. And avoiding direct contact with my in-laws didn't cause anything in particular that made the relationship deteriorate. 2 years passed by in a flash, and I became pregnant with Tim's child and gave birth to a healthy baby boy without any issues. When I returned to my hospital room from the delivery room, Tim, who had been eagerly awaiting my son and I, walked up and held our child for the first time. I expected him to let out a cry of joy, but instead, doubtful words reached my ears as I finished giving birth.
His eyes are blue. Why? Is this child not mine?
I couldn't understand what he meant. Why was Tim glaring at me with such a grim expression? I tried to think with my still exhausted and dazed mind, but nothing came to mind.
What are you saying? That child is yours, Tim. What's wrong with his eyes? Look for yourself. His eyes are blue. Those aren't the eyes of our family. Since you undoubtedly gave birth to him, doesn't that mean he has a blue-eyed foreigner for a father? Are you saying I cheated on you? I absolutely never did such a thing. Then why are his eyes blue? Both of us have brown eyes. I've never heard of a blue-eyed child being born between two brown-eyed people.
I tried to say something in return, but a nurse who came running in surprise at the commotion intervened, and the situation settled down for the moment. After some time passed, I spoke with Tim again. Tim had regained his composure on the surface, but his eyes were still harsh as he looked at me. More than anything, he wouldn't even try to hold our son. He thought I had cheated on him with a blue-eyed man who wasn't him and gave birth to that man's child. I had absolutely never betrayed him like that. However, the fact was that our son's eyes were blue. I couldn't explain the reason why.
It's not that you can't explain, you just don't want to admit you cheated, right? Please believe me. There must be some way we can investigate this.
I somehow managed to say that, and just as it occurred to me that we could surely prove it if we had the genes tested, my in-laws burst into the hospital room.
Dad, Mom, why are you here?
Tim raised his voice in surprise. Tim shouldn't have told my in-laws that I had gone into labor, being considerate of how I wanted to avoid meeting them as much as possible. Of course, we couldn't not inform them of the birth, but we had intended to let them know after both the baby and I had fully settled down after the delivery.
I have an acquaintance among the nurses here.
And of course she knows about Tim, so she went out of her way to let us know that our grandchild was about to be born.
Not informing us of the birth of our first grandchild, what an unfilial son. Well, I guess I was kind of the same when you were born though.
The two of them had the biggest smiles on their faces that I had ever seen. You just had a baby, so why do you have such a displeased look on your face?
Yeah, the child was born healthy. But since I found out it's not mine, of course I'd have this kind of expression.
At the words Tim spat out, my in-laws exchanged glances with a look of incomprehension. Eventually, my mother-in-law peered at the baby's face and let out a loud voice.
It's true. This isn't Tim's child. Look at his eyes, he has blue eyes. What did you say?
My father-in-law, who had also shouted and stared at the baby.
You're right. His eyes are blue. I've never seen a child with eyes like that,
he said, turning back to face me. What is the meaning of this, Sophie? Were you planning on tricking Tim into raising some foreigner's child? What an appalling woman.
I thought you seemed rather distant when we met, but to think you had such intentions. That's not it. There must be some reason for this. I'm sure we'll understand if we investigate.
It was painful to have them hurl such heart-wrenching words at me one after another. But what hurt the most was that Tim, who should have been protecting me, was glaring at me together with my in-laws. A nurse, unable to bear watching my in-laws shouting in further agitation, calling me an adulterous woman and saying they'd make me pay compensation and divorce, ushered them out of the room. When she said she would call the police if they continued making a commotion and disturbing the mental stability of the patient, my in-laws finally withdrew quietly. I had fallen from the heights of being blessed with a son to the depths of despair. More than anything, the shock of being turned away by Tim, who should have been my greatest ally, left me unable to even shed tears and simply dumbfounded. After a while, my in-laws said,
"There's no point in looking at the face of someone else's child,"
and left. Tim sat silently with an air of not wanting to even look at the baby I was holding.
"I rushed out of the office because you went into labor, so what am I supposed to say when my colleagues congratulate me? Ugh."
I learned for the first time that Tim was capable of such cruelty. As I sat there unable to say anything more, Tim stood up.
"I'm not coming here anymore,"
he said coldly and tried to leave the room. Was this the end of my relationship with Tim and we would get divorced? The anxiety of whether this child would suddenly lose his father washed over me.
"Hey, wait! I know it's impossible to just ask you to believe me. So at least, before you end your relationship with me, please listen to one last request from me."
Hearing that, Tim reluctantly stopped in his tracks.
"Please ask the hospital to do a DNA test. The results should be available in about a week. If it determines he's not your child, then you can abandon me. You can even demand compensation. I haven't betrayed you. Even if we find out much later when the child grows up that he is yours, it will be too late to start over as father and son then."
My final plea seemed to reach Tim's heart, if only slightly. Tim said,
"Fine. That will make the truth clear,"
and left the room. After that, I wasn't in any state of mind to talk to anyone. I told the nurse that I couldn't see anyone else until my parents, whom I had contacted as soon as I went into labor, arrived, and had her refuse any visitors. That night, my parents, who had forcibly transferred trains to get there, rushed to the hospital barely in time for visiting hours. The moment I saw my parents' faces for the first time in a while, I shed tears of relief that someone had finally come who would be on my side.
"You did really well."
What happened to Tim? Has he not come yet? Asked that, I hesitated over whether to tell them what had happened here until then. But I had nothing to be ashamed of, and I thought that if the results of the upcoming test came out, my relationship with Tim could be repaired, so I decided to keep quiet to avoid giving my parents unnecessary worry. I made the painful excuse that Tim had been with me until just before, but he had to go back to the office for a bit because there was some work he absolutely had to do himself. And my mother Lenore gently held my son, whom neither Tim nor my in-laws had held, and peered at his face. What kind of reaction would Lenore have upon seeing his blue eyes? If she reacted the same way as Tim and the others? Thinking that, I couldn't look at Lenore's face and inadvertently lowered my head.
"Oh, how adorable. His features take after Tim, don't they? Let me see. Oh, you're right. But the shape of his nose resembles Sophie."
My father Sullivan also looked happy. It was a very ordinary reaction for grandparents seeing their first grandchild, but their response full of joy made me truly happy from the bottom of my heart.
"Look, this child has blue eyes too. Just like when Sophie was born."
I reflexively raised my head.
"What?"
and let out a surprised. My eyes met those of my parents, who were smiling with faces full of affection. My eyes were blue when I was born too.
"That's right. Oh, did we never tell you?"
It wasn't that uncommon among our relatives. We probably didn't think it was worth mentioning. Wondering what on earth they were talking about, I asked for a more detailed explanation. My mother didn't have particularly detailed knowledge, but apparently my father had heard a more in-depth explanation from a doctor friend of his, so he explained it to me. Even if a person was born with blue eyes, there are cases where the color changes due to genetics. The frequency tends to be higher in the South when looking nationwide, and it's known that the area where I was born has an especially high tendency for that. And it's also apparently quite common for eyes that were blue to gradually approach the level of brown as the child grows. I was a child who fit that exact case. Indeed, I had been told a few times before that my eye color looked lighter. My eye color probably looks a bit lighter than other people's because what were originally blue eyes gradually turned brown. But since this wasn't an unusual story where I'm from, it seems my parents never mentioned it to me after I grew up. However, my mother said she must have told me about it a few times when I was little. If that's true, I may have just let it go in one ear and out the other. But I didn't care about such minor details. Knowing the reason why I had a blue-eyed child and that I could properly explain it to Tim now, the tears I had been holding back started flowing out. My parents, surprised by my sudden crying, held my shoulders in bewilderment. For a while, I just indulged in that sensation and continued crying. During that time, my son stayed cradled in my mother's arms, breathing peacefully in his sleep. Eventually, when my parents heard from me about what had just happened, they became furious. I had never seen my parents display such intense anger before. My parents immediately tried to call Tim, who had gone home earlier, to come back. But since visiting hours were almost over, they said they would meet Tim outside and left the hospital room. I heard later that my father had expressed his tremendous anger to Tim, saying,
"How could you not believe your wife's story at all, not even hold the baby, and go home like that?"
And Tim had been thoroughly contrite. He told Tim about the area where I was born and raised, about the mechanism behind the different eye color. He apparently even sent Tim photos of neighborhood children with blue eyes to show him. And Tim was apparently convinced by that. I was told that if my mother hadn't intervened at the end, my father looked ready to punch Tim. Hearing that Tim had apologized with tears in his eyes, saying he was truly sorry, I felt my intense anger towards him abate slightly. The next day, Tim took an emergency day off work and rushed to my hospital room first thing in the morning to apologize for his words and actions yesterday. "I'm sorry. I had this preconceived notion that if both parents have brown eyes, the child will always be born with brown eyes too. I judged based solely on the bias that a child's eyes can't be blue unless one of the parents has blue eyes."
It's okay. I didn't know that my eyes were blue when I was little either. Or rather, I didn't remember. And the DNA test results aren't back yet, so right now I'm just happy you believe this story.
Tim promised to take responsibility for clearing up his parents' misunderstanding himself, and vowed not to create any more opportunities for me to come face to face with them in the future. Later, Tim called his parents home, but when that didn't work, he apparently ended up going directly to their house to explain the situation. However, it seems that even so, his parents wouldn't abandon their suspicion towards me. They stubbornly insisted that we still couldn't know until the DNA test results came back, and even criticized Tim for discarding his doubts so quickly. But this time, Tim had also looked into and come to understand that there was a possibility of blue-eyed children being born even from brown-eyed parents, and had come to believe in my innocence. However, no matter how much Tim explained those things, his parents wouldn't listen at all. On the contrary, they insulted us, saying we were just putting on an act and even getting the neighbors involved. They even went so far as to say that if Tim broke up with me and took over the factory soon, they would find him a better woman. Tim finally exploded in anger at their utter lack of obedience.
"If you two continue to insult Sophie like this, I'm cutting ties with you."
And apparently stormed out, saying so. And about a week passed. Our son had no health issues whatsoever, and by then I had completely recovered from the initial uproar. And on the day I was discharged from the hospital with our son, the DNA test results arrived. Tim, who had purposely brought the unopened results all the way from home to my hospital room, opened the envelope in front of me. It stated that a high enough match rate to definitively say the baby was mine and Tim's child had been confirmed. Tim stared long and hard at the test results, and finally bowed his head deeply to me and said, "I'm truly sorry." I couldn't completely forgive him with just this apology after he had hurled such verbal abuse at me. But Tim had been convinced until that moment that a child inherits the eye color of either the father or mother. But I had thought the same thing. If the child born looked nothing like one's own at a glance, perhaps one would get flustered like that. Thinking that, I couldn't bring myself to say we should divorce. Tim, who apologized to me many times over, said he would tell his parents about these results and left the house. I didn't want to have any contact with his parents in any form, so I even thought it would be fine not telling them at all.
If we leave this misunderstanding as is, my parents might scheme something to make us divorce using this as a reason. They're already spreading rumors to the neighbors. So I have to properly convey the facts to them.
Hearing Tim say that, I decided to leave his parents to Tim and not think about it at all. Eventually, Tim returned after finishing the phone call and said with a relieved expression,
"I explained it to them properly. Just in case,
I also took a photo of the test results and emailed it to them. I told them I'm not going to visit them in the future and asked them not to come see us either. With those words, I could feel that all my connections to his parents had vanished. However, as I was preparing to be discharged and going through the procedures for billing and such, his parents showed up. After that phone call, they had immediately hailed a taxi and rushed over. I heard Tim,
I told them not to come,
who was carrying our luggage, mutter, "Sophie, I heard it's been proven the baby is Tim's son. That's great. Now everything can be smoothed over."
Yeah, and it's a boy too. Thank you for giving birth to a healthy heir.
I was speechless. There's an expression to flip-flop on someone, but this wasn't like that at all. It was as if they had flipped the heavens and earth with how drastically their attitude had changed. Could it be the same mouths saying these words that had cursed me as an adulteress?
Take this chance to divorce her and get compensation money.
And hurled insults at me just days ago. As I stood there dumbfounded, Tim, who had been standing in front of me, dropped his shoulders and crouched down on the spot. Tim apparently felt so deflated he couldn't stand at the sight of his parents' utterly self-centered behavior. As if not to miss that chance, my mother-in-law slipped past Tim and approached right in front of me.
Here, let me hold him.
I instinctively drew back from my mother-in-law, who was extending both hands. Then even my father-in-law approached. You too, as the child grows bigger your place will likely get too cramped, so you can come live with us. Luckily we have plenty of land, so we can even add on to the house. The grandchild will probably be happier with more liveliness too. I felt slightly dizzy. To think they'd even suggest living together. Perhaps they have no sense of shame. Staying with these people any longer would likely impede my postpartum recovery. But I didn't want to line up my words here and argue back either. No matter what I said, my father-in-law probably wouldn't listen, and more than anything, I didn't want to let my newborn son hear my angry voice. I brushed away my mother-in-law's hands that persistently kept reaching out trying to hold my son, approached the taxi they had arrived in, and conveyed my intention to get in with my gaze. Tim, who had been standing there dumbfounded, noticed my desire to leave this place as soon as possible and helped me get in, pushing aside his parents who were standing there stunned at being blatantly ignored.
Hurry and go!
Tim also got in and told the driver. The taxi immediately drove off, leaving the hospital behind. For a moment, I saw the side of his dumbfounded parents seeing us off reflected in the side mirror, but I never looked back again. Later, Tim reluctantly answered one of the several calls that came in from his parents. In a cold voice, Tim told his parents on the other end of the line that he was cutting ties with them.
I want Dad and Mom to have absolutely no involvement in our lives anymore. To not even apologize to Sophie and suggest living together is unthinkable as human beings. I won't let either of you see Sophie or our son at all. Please don't think of our son as your grandchild. I'll never let you two meet him, so give up.
Saying that, he hung up and immediately did something on his mobile phone before putting it away. After that, no more calls came in, so I assumed he had blocked their numbers, but Tim told me without saying anything unnecessary that we would never be bothered about this matter again. However, knowing his parents, no matter how strongly Tim declared he was cutting ties with them, in the end they might even show up at our apartment. But even if his parents took such actions, I knew I no longer had to worry about anything. Actually, a little before our son was born, Tim had gotten a job as a ski resort manager through an introduction from an acquaintance. Tim had been so eager to work in a job related to skiing that he had specifically chosen to work at a sports equipment company. So when he received word of this position,
I definitely want to do it.
He was overjoyed and had replied. That place was in my hometown, where my parents also live. For me too, this job offer had the best possible conditions. If possible, I had wanted to give birth at a hospital there, but by the time this job change was decided, my due date was fast approaching. Transferring to a different hospital suddenly during this time was high risk, and more than anything, there were few hospitals that handled deliveries there and they were all full with local pregnant women. So in that case, we had decided I would give birth at the hospital here where I had been receiving regular checkups from the beginning. That was the situation, so we had decided to wait until our son was old enough for long-distance travel and move the whole family together. We finished relocating our base of living while keeping this move and job change hidden from Tim's parents until the very end. By the time a month had passed since our son was born, everything was over. Fortunately, our son grew up healthy in both mind and body, and no issues arose at all during the long-distance move. In the end, during the time it took for us to finish moving like that, his parents never showed up at our apartment. Several years have passed since then, but an opportunity to have contact with his parents has yet to come. Our son, who is now running around energetically, continues to grow up without even knowing of his grandparents' existence. At one point, I had a chance to talk with an acquaintance living near his parents' house, and they told me about the recent state of affairs around that factory. After we suddenly cut off contact, not only were they unable to see their grandson, but even their only son Tim avoided them, and apparently this caused both his parents to completely lose their energy. Perhaps because Dylan's vigor had declined, he was unable to turn around the factory's performance that had been on a downward trend, and he apparently decided on his own to shut it down. The factory that Dylan had been so eager to have Tim take over and even pass on to his grandchild no longer exists. The acquaintance had seen my mother-in-law Caddy out shopping a few times, but said she seemed lifeless. Eventually Caddy injured her leg and it impeded her mobility, and she apparently became unable to even do housework satisfactorily. Dylan, who had no life skills and had never even done his own laundry, was apparently seen by people many times wearing terribly dirty clothes. And now, it seems both that house and factory are deserted and have become completely vacant. This is just my guess, but I think the two of them, having lost their ability to live on their own, were probably taken into a facility for elderly support or something similar by the government. Of course, I have no intention of going out of my way to confirm their whereabouts. And we, the husband and wife who became ski resort managers, are working hard at our jobs every day in the dreamlike environment of working at the ski resort we love. Since it's an environment where we can visit my parents' home with just a little travel, we go back and forth and help each other out when needed. My parents come over all the time, making up various excuses because they want to see their grandson even when they don't really need help. Our son is very attached to my parents too and really looks forward to seeing them. Having frequently gone to the ski resort from the time he gained awareness, our son is naturally showing an interest in skiing. He's already imitating skiing form and making us and my parents smile. Once this child grows up enough to be able to ski, the day will surely come when we can all ski together as a family. I can hardly wait for that day to arrive. Upon arriving at the Target high-rise apartment, I approached the concierge and was handed the keys to the room. Through the elevator reserved for the higher floors, I made my way to the top floor of the apartment.
Wow, this is lovely.
As the door opened, my sister-in-law, Laura, was the first to leap in, dancing around as she exclaimed, "Let's get unpacking." I called out, but no one offered to help. Predictable, yet it still irked me. The movers placed the boxes where directed, and I was left to unpack alone.
I'll take this spacious room.
Katrina can have the tiny storeroom. My father-in-law, Harrison, and my mother-in-law, Rosalind, went ahead and decided who was getting which room. But I ignored them and continued my work.
This room is really nice. It would make a great final home.
Good for us. My husband, Oliver, and the in-laws said to each other, all smiles.
It feels like a dream to live in such a house,
Laura said with her eyes brimming with tears. It might be time to reveal the truth.
Huh? Whose house are you talking about? Huh?
My name is Katrina. I'm a 32-year-old freelance illustrator. I used to work for a major publishing company, but went independent and now mainly take on projects from my former employer, while also starting to work as a children's book author. I married Oliver 2 years ago, and we began living together in the apartment I've been residing in. The reason we live in my house is that it's my property, and Oliver, who was renting elsewhere, moved in with me. My parents died in a car accident when I was young. Afterwards, I was raised by my grandparents, and after graduating from college and securing a job, I bought this apartment. The payment was made using the compensation and insurance money received from my parents' accident. My grandparents raised me without touching that money and gave it to me to use for myself when I graduated college. I bought this place because my grandparents entered a nursing home. They had reserved a spot in the nursing facility, intending to move in together after raising me, not wanting me to bear the burden of their care. After much thought, I decided to buy this convenient apartment, which was also close to the nursing home my grandparents were in. My grandparents said there were other things I could spend the money on, but to me, this was the best use. I have been living here for almost 10 years now. The 10 years I spent with my parents and the 10 years I spent with my grandparents are nearly equal. I've been living in this apartment a third of my life, and I have grown quite attached to this place. I met Oliver at a friend's wedding after party. He was a colleague of my friend's husband. We were of the same age and formed a group that started hanging out together. Over time, several couples formed from this group, and a few have married. And one of those couples was Oliver and I. Oliver was cheerful and seemed to brighten the room just by being there. From our first meeting, I was attracted to him. I admired his cheerful nature, something I lacked, and thought he was a wonderful person. However, that was only the face Oliver showed to the world, and I quickly learned about his other side after we got married. While Oliver was very gentlemanly during our courtship, he turned out to be the type who changes once the marriage is set. No, it was worse than that. After we got married, he said something unbelievable. "Since I'm living in your house, you should take care of the living expenses." "What do you mean?" "The expenses would be the same even if I weren't here, right? So, you should continue to cover them as you have been." I think that's how it should be. Indeed, my apartment was already paid off, with no mortgage remaining. However, there were still maintenance fees, a sinking fund for repairs, and property tax. And since we have a car, there's also the parking fee. "So, those are expenses you'd be paying even if I weren't here, right?" "That's true, but..." "Then, there should be no problem with you continuing to pay them as usual." His argument seemed reasonable at first glance, but was fundamentally flawed. "But Oliver, you're living here now, too. We agreed to split the living expenses. I'd really appreciate it if you could contribute." When I said this, Oliver's eyes narrowed angrily.
You're so money-grubbing. I never thought you were that kind of woman.
I was stunned and speechless. To me, it was obvious that as a married couple, we would share our lives equally. I had naturally assumed we would split the expenses for our home.
I'm not saying I won't contribute anything. I'll definitely pay half for my part. But you own this house, right?
So, he meant since it's my property, I should bear the costs.
I'll pay for my own necessities, isn't that fair enough?
Reluctantly, I agreed to his request. In the beginning, Oliver did pay half the living expenses as promised. But only the half that I billed him for. This month's electricity bill came to this amount.
That seems quite high. You're probably wasting money working from home?
I had quit my job while dating Oliver and started working freelance. Though I occasionally went out for meetings and networking, most of my work was done from home.
It doesn't seem fair.
First, Oliver complained about the high utility bills.
Unfair? How so? Well, I work outside almost all day. And I'm supposed to pay for your electricity use while you work from home?
What a reasoning. I was too astounded to respond.
I only use a little when I come home to sleep. So, I don't have to pay half, right?
Following this logic, Oliver began paying only a minimal amount. The same went for gas and water bills. Still, I tolerated it. Sure, Oliver was only home for a short time. And having an extra person did significantly increase the utility bills. But it was impossible to calculate exactly how much each of us used. Despite his complaints, we did share the living expenses, so I silently accepted his reasoning. Looking back, I can't believe how foolish I was, but at the time, I thought it was necessary. I decided it was better to endure and keep our marital life peaceful than to fight over something trivial from the start. Aside from money issues, Oliver was as bright and fun as before we got married. Though the financial concern always lingered in the back of my mind, I didn't struggle to live without his contributions. And I valued our happy times more. But the supposed happiness began to feel increasingly precarious. More overtime today, they really need to get it together. Oliver started coming home later, sounding annoyed. Are you okay with all this overtime? There's a guideline that working over a certain number of hours a month is dangerous. You don't understand. Those are just nominal figures. A good salesman isn't just working the hours logged on the time card. Oliver said this disdainfully. Katrina, you've had to pull all-nighters to meet deadlines, right? Yes, that's true. That's my point. Don't be fooled by just the apparent numbers. I graduated from an art college and worked as an illustrator. So I really didn't know much about sales. Faced with his assertion, I had no choice but to believe him. I understand. But please, don't overdo it. I know. You're kind, Katrina. I won't push myself too hard. Oliver reassured me gently, embracing my shoulder. I tried to believe in Oliver's kindness forcefully, as if believing was the only way to keep my peace of mind. Gradually, I felt increasingly betrayed by Oliver over the year. They say people can react to sudden pain, but become desensitized to slow, incremental pain. By that point, Oliver's betrayals had accumulated significantly, yet I felt I was just enduring a little longer, spending my days pretending not to notice for the sake of peace. Then, a significant event occurred. My family's coming over soon, is that okay? One morning, Oliver suddenly mentioned this. Harrison and Rosalind? And Laura too? I had visited his family's home once before we married, for a family meeting. It was a small house in the countryside. It seemed to be a fairly old house, and every part of it was old, but my parents-in-law were living there. At that time, Laura had already moved out after getting married, so I wasn't able to meet her. We did message her, but as she couldn't come due to her schedule, but gave us a message, welcome to the family. Since we didn't have a wedding ceremony and only took photos, that was the only time I met his parents. Of course, I never had a chance to meet Laura. Our friends held a party for us to congratulate, but I still hadn't met Oliver's relatives. As I didn't have much interaction with my own relatives, and I did not find it so strange. Now, suddenly, his parents and Laura were coming to visit. It wasn't odd for them to want to see how we were doing after a year of marriage. Without any doubt, I agreed to Oliver's words. A week later, as promised, the in-laws came to our house. This is your place? It's not very big, is it? That was the first thing they said as they entered our home. Of course, it's not big. This house was originally bought for me to live in alone. It has 3 rooms and a spacious living dining area. One room is almost used as a storage, and the remaining rooms served as my office and bedroom. When Oliver started living with me, he wanted a space to work from home, so I gave up my office for Oliver's study. And now I work in the living room. It's spacious enough for 2 people to live without any inconvenience. As I was thinking this, Laura, whom I was meeting for the first time after Rosalind, entered the house. You're right, it's smaller than I thought. Are we going to live here together? It's small, but bear with it. They say any place becomes comfortable if you live in it. Well, it's better than nothing. I'll manage to live here. How long do they intend to stay? As I pondered vaguely, Oliver commanded me with an irritated voice.
Hey, what are you dozing off for? Hurry up and carry in my parents' luggage.
What? Oh, sorry. Which ones are their luggage? I thought it would be just enough luggage for a short stay, maybe a duffel bag. But when I looked inside the entrance, I couldn't find anything.
What are you looking at? It's outside.
Rushing to the entrance, I saw about 10 cardboard boxes piled up in the hallway. Cardboard boxes for a visit to their son's house? I didn't understand the meaning, but leaving such things in the hallway would bother other residents. Fortunately, none of the boxes were too heavy, and I somehow managed to bring all of them into the living room by myself. Since it's a living dining area, it's quite spacious. Although it's obstructive, stacking them up secured enough space to place them. During this time, Oliver and the in-laws were sitting and talking.
Make coffee once you're done with the luggage. Hurry up, everyone is tired.
I couldn't think properly due to the situation and moved reflexively to Oliver's words. You really are so inconsiderate. I'm worried about our future.
I'll sleep in this room.
While I was cluelessly making coffee, Laura declared our bedroom as her room. That's fine. I'll clean up the storage with Mom, and when we're done, we'll sleep together.
It'll be nice to sleep with Oliver after a long time.
Sleeping closely with family, how nice. Oliver and his parents acted as if I didn't exist, enjoying their family time. Our house only has a bedroom, a storage room, and what now serves as Oliver's study, which was my former office. Where am I supposed to sleep? And how long will this lifestyle continue? It seems humans can't think properly when faced with situations far beyond their usual understanding. While I was stunned, everything had already ended. The next day, from the moment the in-laws moved in, hell began.
Hey, isn't the food ready yet?
Sorry, I'm preparing it now. You're really slow.
Oliver must have a lot of patience to put up with someone like you.
The in-laws lazed around the house all day, doing nothing, and treated me like a servant. At first, I endured it, thinking it would only be for a few days. But listening to the conversations between the in-laws and Oliver, it became clear that this was going to be a permanent situation, and I awakened. Here's the summary. The in-laws had fled from their hometown because Laura had returned home after getting divorced. The reason for the divorce was Laura's infidelity. She had affairs with multiple people. All of this came to light recently, and her ex-husband demanded compensation, which they couldn't afford, so they fled here. Oliver had told me that his in-laws owned their home, but that was a lie. Originally, that house belonged to Rosalind's real family, where her parents lived. Rosalind and Harrison moved in with them because they couldn't afford to live by themselves. And after Rosalind's parents passed away, they just stayed there. The real owner was Rosalind's brother, and he asked them to leave, but they stayed, claiming residency rights. Rosalind's brother had his own home, so he couldn't force his sister's family to move out. He had requested them to leave, but couldn't do no more than that. Then, with Laura returning with a mountain of compensation to pay, Rosalind and Harrison tried to sell the house to raise money. Rosalind's brother, upon learning the situation, was furious and threatened legal action. That's why the in-laws showed up at our place with all the belongings she could carry. Those belongings, 10 boxes of them, the ones I struggled to bring into our house the day they arrived, representing their entire fortune. I don't know what's inside, and frankly, I don't want to know, but it seems there's nothing of real value that could be called a fortune. In short, the in-laws moved in with us because they were broke. And it looks like they plan to live off of us indefinitely. In such a family, Oliver was miraculously smart. He was good at his studies and managed to graduate from college on a scholarship. You wouldn't guess he's part of that family just by looking at him. He continued to play the role of a refreshing, fine young man, got a job at a well-known company, and then met and married me. I couldn't see through Oliver's true nature or the real face of the in-laws. My parents had already passed away, so I'm all alone. But I'm working and already own a house. To Oliver, I must have seemed like a perfect target. No way, I'm not going to let this happen to myself. Now that I know everything, I refuse to quietly become their slave. I won't let this no-good family take advantage of me. I started planning my retaliation and took action the very next day. For now, I had to act submissive. I couldn't let Oliver or the in-laws catch on to my plan. I had to catch them off guard. Just like how they suddenly showed up here. After pretending to listen to the in-laws for about a week, one day, Laura said to me, "Give me some money." Laura demanded, extending her open right hand. She was so blatantly freeloading. It was irritating, but I had decided not to resist for now. I handed Laura a few bills.
"Is this all? Don't you have more?"
"I don't have more on me right now since this was sudden."
"Then a credit card will do."
"Absolutely not. If I gave her a card, there's no telling what she'd do with it." "I can't lend you a card. I'll withdraw some money from the bank tomorrow. Please wait until then." I managed to quiet the complaining in-laws by making that promise. I wouldn't give them the card no matter what. That night, after Oliver came home, he complained about it. "You could have just lent them the card. You're really stingy with money." I was appalled by his words, but I apologized, thinking it over. "I'm sorry. I thought there could be problems if something happened."
"Like what?"
"I was afraid of lending a card with a different name, and if Rosalind and Harrison got arrested for misuse, I couldn't do it." Oliver seemed satisfied with this reason.
"Then, make a family card for my mom and dad. I'm counting on you."
"Understood." I replied as such, but I had no intention of making one. About a month later, Oliver asked about the status of the family card. Maybe the in-laws, having received money several times, found it troublesome and urged Oliver to ask for the card. "I'm sorry, but it seems I can't make it," I said, feigning disappointment. I hadn't applied for a family card and wasn't disappointed at all.
"Why not?"
"Rosalind and the others are considered relatives, not family, so it doesn't work. Apparently, it's not okay just to live here temporarily." The in-laws had just rolled in without permission, and no proper arrangements had been made for living together. They haven't even changed the address registration, so it seems like there's no actual residence. "I see." Faced with this explanation, Oliver seemed to have no choice but to accept. "Well, then we just need to change the address registration."
"That's right, since we're going to live here anyway.
"Go ahead and take care of the procedures." What a nerve for them to order me to do so. "About that, I think this house is a bit small for us to live in permanently. Now that you mention it, maybe that's why you haven't been coming home much lately." When I said that, Oliver looked a bit puzzled.
"I've been staying at hotels because I've been working late."
"Oh, that must be tough. So, I was thinking, why don't we move out of this house?" Oliver and the in-laws were surprised by my suggestion. This house was originally bought for me to live alone, and while Oliver and I could barely make do. It's definitely too small in the current situation. Indeed. Look at this. Wouldn't you want to live in a house like this? I showed them the brochure for a new apartment. It was a recently completed high-rise building. The brochure featured photos of a top-floor apartment. Spacious, with large windows offering a view of the city below. "How are you able to get an apartment like this?" "I thought our current place was too cramped, so I decided to go for it. I sold this place and added my parents' inheritance and savings to buy it.
That's great. This place isn't bad, but that one is definitely better.
Laura and Oliver, who had been looking skeptically, relaxed when they learned the payment was already complete.
Wow, you've got some sense. I'm seeing you in a new light for the first time.
Yeah, I guess I can acknowledge you as Oliver's wife. The in-laws nodded in agreement with smiles. And just like that, the move was settled smoothly. About a month later, the day of the move arrived. It was a bit sad to say goodbye to the house we had lived in for so long, but it was for a brighter future. Once the belongings were loaded into 2 trucks, we headed to our new destination. Upon arriving at the high-rise and speaking to the concierge, we were handed the keys to our apartment. To our top-floor apartment via the high-rise exclusive elevator.
Wow, it's beautiful.
Laura was the first to dash in, exclaiming as if dancing.
Let's get unpacking.
I called out, but no one offered to help. As expected, but still infuriating. The movers placed the brought items where directed, and I began unpacking alone.
I'll take this spacious room.
Katrina can have the tiny storage.
The in-laws were assigning rooms as they pleased, but I ignored them and continued my work.
This room is truly wonderful.
A great choice for our final home.
I'm glad you feel that way.
Oliver and the in-laws were all smiles, exchanging such words.
It's like a dream to live in a house like this,
Laura said, teary-eyed. Now, it might be a good time for the reveal.
Huh? Whose house are you talking about? Huh?
A good moment to show the in-laws reality.
Why would you all live here?
What are you talking about? It's our new home. We're the ones who will live here.
Huh?
I feigned exaggerated surprise.
This isn't your house. I bought this place to live with my grandparents.
You asked if we wanted to live in a house like this.
Laura began to make a scene, raising her voice.
Yes, I did ask if you wanted to live here, but that's all I did. I never said you could live here.
Just as I said, I never mentioned living together. Who would want to live with these people forever? So, please leave now.
I am the owner of this house. The landlord is telling you to leave. Please comply before things get complicated.
Don't be ridiculous.
Oliver stomped his feet in anger, his face turning red.
The only thing you should be doing is listening to me. My family and I will live in this house. If you don't like it, you should leave. That's right, get out. That's right, leave.
Oliver and the in-laws were pressuring me to leave. I contacted the concierge directly through the intercom on the wall.
Excuse me, there are some strange people refusing to leave my house and trying to kick me out, the actual resident. Please come immediately.
As soon as I finished speaking, a siren sounded throughout the room.
What's this? So noisy. Make it stop right now.
The security staff arrived promptly after the alert. This is a high-end condominium after all.
These people are the building security. If you don't leave now, I'll call the police next.
When the security officer pressed the doorbell and asked what happened, the in-laws started panicking. They realized what I said wasn't a lie. Although the security staff arrived, the in-laws pleaded, crawling on the ground, asking to be heard. I decided to listen, curious about what Oliver had been telling them. Oliver had been telling the in-laws I was a pitiable woman with no relatives, and that I couldn't live without him. So that's why he was keeping me here. And that they could use me as they pleased, like a housekeeper. That was what he had been telling his own parents. I felt sympathy for the in-laws who provided such valuable testimony. Actually, when I gave money to the in-laws, I made them sign a paper with the amount written on it. Essentially, it was a promissory note. I want proof that I've handed it over properly to show Oliver. Otherwise, I'll get in trouble. If you sign it, I'll give you as much as you want. Knowing they could get as much money as they wanted just by signing, the in-laws easily complied. Thanks to that, I had proof of how much I had lent them. I had been thinking of collecting from the in-laws, but it seemed impossible for them to pay back. So I decided to take it from Oliver instead and thought it best to evict them from the apartment. Thanks to this, you've helped me a lot. If you leave now, I'll consider this never happened, but if you come back, you'll have to pay everything all at once. As I showed them the promissory note and said this, the in-laws finally gave up and left.
I'm Katrina's husband. I have the right to live here. I won't leave.
Oliver refused to move. If that's how you feel, let's settle this here and now.
All right, let's have a little talk then. But if you try anything funny, I'll call them right back.
I thanked the security guards and sent them back home.
Why are you doing this? Did you dislike my family that much?
Of course I do. They suddenly show up, treating me like slaves in a sneak attack. I made it clear to Oliver. Fine. If you dislike them that much, I'll tell my mom and dad to leave. But I can stay, right? I was astounded. He was planning to abandon his in-laws just so he could stay. What a despicable man. No, you need to leave too.
Why? We're married, aren't we?
I presented Oliver with a folder.
What is this?
Oliver turned pale as he looked inside the folder. A pretty woman, isn't she? I heard you've been living together for half the week lately. It was evidence of Oliver's affair. There were tons of photos of the two looking cozy, arm in arm, walking together, entering a hotel. Oliver had started dating her right after marrying me.
I heard you had plans to live with her in that apartment once we were separated. Lies! Who would say such a thing?
I turned on the voice recorder I was holding. The voice of the other woman played, and Oliver froze. The evidence was obtained by a detective agency. They approached the woman, kindly informed her that Oliver was married, and recorded what she had to say. The woman proudly claimed that Oliver was in the midst of divorce proceedings, and once he kicked out his wife, they would live together in Oliver's apartment. Oliver told his affair partner he wanted to divorce, but I wouldn't agree, and after being worn out by the in-laws, I would quietly leave. The affair partner believed she was the only one Oliver loved, thinking the marriage had already cooled off. True love will prevail, she laughed. But when she realized she was talking to someone from a detective agency, she panicked and started to cover for herself. She claimed she was also deceived by Oliver, truly believing the marriage was over. She begged for forgiveness, promising to tell everything. The detective asked me what to do, and upon saying it depended on what she said, she spilled everything not even asked for. All of that was recorded. I guess true love seems quite fragile.
Yes, I got the evidence. Looks like this is going to cost a pretty penny in damages.
Oliver collapsed weakly onto the floor.
Your stuff is already sent to that woman's condo, so you can start living there from today. Now, leave.
I called the concierge again and had Oliver, who was still drained, thrown out. As promised, I decided not to delve further into the affair partner. Her testimony was enough to prove Oliver's maliciousness. Thanks to that, I was able to get a substantial amount in damages from Oliver. It was enough to forgive him. However, I made sure to inform the woman's parents and her company. I hadn't promised not to tell anyone, so it should be fine to talk. The woman was Oliver's junior at work. They got close as they worked together. It would have been a nice story if they weren't married. I complained to the company about what kind of employee training they were providing, which led to our divorce. The company apologized for the lack of supervision. Concerned about their social reputation, the company made the woman resign under the guise of voluntary resignation. Oliver was demoted and transferred from the head office to a subsidiary as a punishment. During work hours, the two of them would concoct lies about sales meetings and sneak off to hotels. Or take trips together and claim them as business expenses. Given the harm they caused the company, such actions seemed justified to them. I heard through the grapevine that the in-laws are now living together in her apartment for real. It's your fault things have ended up like this, take responsibility. That's what they say, squatting in the condominium where Oliver and the woman live. Oliver and the woman had to take out loans to pay me compensation. Now they live a difficult life, struggling every day to repay their debt. It might be about time to finally kick the in-laws out, I suppose. Oliver thought I was just some pitiful woman, burdened with grandparents who were in a care facility, but the reality was a bit different. My grandparents were indeed in a facility, but it was a luxurious place where wealthy people live gracefully. They used to run a company and had planned to pass it on to my parents, but they died young. So they retired after handing it over to someone they could trust. That was the year I graduated from college. I've loved drawing since I was a child and have won numerous awards for it. I told my grandparents I wanted to work in art, so they never forced me to take over the company. They decided to move into that facility so I could live freely as I wished. I followed my dreams into a career related to art, and now I'm becoming known as a children's book author. My illustrated books have become a big hit, and I'm now somewhat of a celebrity. I feel like my luck has turned around dramatically since splitting up with Oliver. He must be regretting it by now. I bought that high-rise apartment with the money from selling that condo, my parents' inheritance, and my book royalties. I wanted to live with my grandparents again while they were still healthy. Of course, I'm keeping the facility as an option. It's necessary for when either of my grandparents becomes physically incapacitated and needs extensive care. But for now, they're both still healthy. Thanks to my book sales, I can finally give back to my grandparents. We can live happily together for a while longer. Though I went through some hardships because of that man, my future is looking bright.
Ah, feels so refreshing. Revived.
Ensley, my sister-in-law, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, came over to our place and sprawled out on the air-conditioned living room sofa, as usual. My daughter Miranda, who was doing her homework, frowned in annoyance.
Let's see, haven't finished your summer project yet, have you?
Ensley peered over at the summer plan. I remember those days. With summer projects, you never really know what to do, right? In that regard, Miranda, I'm kinda envious of you.
What do you mean?
Miranda asked, puzzled.
Well, not many kids are born with such an interesting face like you. How about you compile something about that challenge of yours? LOL. It'd be easy, right?
Miranda was born with a rare condition called cleft lip and palate, which resulted in splits in her upper lip and palate. She had undergone numerous surgeries over the years, but more than anything, it was the stares from others that hurt her the most. The condition made her face asymmetrical from her mouth to her nose, and the ignorant stares were painfully sharp. Why am I the only one like this? Miranda had tearfully asked before. I couldn't stay silent at Ensley's incredibly insensitive remark.
Ensley, even if we're family, there are things you should and shouldn't say. I was just stating the facts. If she compiles something about her interesting condition, everyone will be pleased, won't they?
Ensley is laughing, saying Miranda's condition is interesting. without knowing how much pain and struggle Mirinda and we have gone through.
Don't worry about what she says, Mirinda.
I grabbed Ensley's arm, ready to forcefully drag her out of the house. That's when Mirinda stood up slowly, smiling, and said,
Don't worry, Mom, I've decided.
My name is Eleanor. I live with my elementary school-aged daughter Mirinda. My husband Dennis is a good husband and father, but he's away on work assignment.
I'm home, Mom.
I'll go wash my hands, then I'll help with chopping the vegetables. Saying this, Mirinda took off her mask. Nowadays, everyone wears masks when going out due to the pandemic. But Mirinda has been wearing a mask in front of anyone other than family since she was young. She must still feel resistance to showing her bare face. Mirinda was born with a condition called cleft lip and palate, which is not commonly known. It's a congenital condition where the upper lip and palate are split, occurring in about 1 in 1,000 births in the United States. Seeing our child for the first time, my husband and I were shocked but also vowed to protect her no matter what. Cleft lip and palate requires several surgeries, and Mirinda's first surgery was just 2 months after she was born. Though the surgery closed her mouth, it didn't completely correct the distortion in her mouth and nose. Most people don't know much about this condition, which made me worried about how Mirinda would be perceived as she grew up. There would surely be times when Mirinda would get hurt. Still, Dennis and I discussed letting Mirinda live like any other child, attending school and going to amusement parks just like her peers. The days of hospital visits must have been painful for young Mirinda, who usually doesn't complain much. Mirinda would become anxious before surgery, saying, "Mom." There must have been unspeakable anxiety clinging to her. She wouldn't let go of my hand until she fell asleep. As an elementary student, Mirinda would come home and share various school events with laughter.
Today, Gerald in my class mimicked the teacher, and it was so funny. During lunch, we played rock, paper, scissors to see who gets the dessert of the kid who was absent, and Caitlin won. Over the last long weekend, Tyrone from the next class went on a vacation with his family. But their dad got lost while driving, and it was a huge mess.
Mirinda would tell fun stories at dinner every day, but I noticed something off. None of the stories Mirinda told included herself. Mirinda always just tells me about things others have said or done. She never mentions doing anything with a friend herself. Despite a bad feeling, I lacked the courage to directly ask her about it. One day in 2nd grade, Mirinda came home crying.
"What's wrong? What happened?"
Seeing Mirinda cry, except before surgeries, surprised me. Mirinda was silent, looking frustrated, but then she couldn't hold back anymore and started crying louder.
"It's okay, you can cry all you want."
I hugged my daughter tightly. After calming down, Mirinda said, "You know, Mom," and shared feelings she had kept to herself. Even though Mirinda wears a mask to school to hide her mouth and nose's distortions, she has to remove it during lunchtime. The first time they ate together, a boy sitting across from her pointed and laughed, saying, "Your face looks weird." That started it, and other kids gathered around, saying, "Really? That's funny," expressing their thoughts aloud. The teacher quickly scolded everyone, "Back to your seats," settling the situation. But from that day, Mirinda felt ostracized, unable to join any friend's circle. She had been enduring this for over a year. "Why did you keep silent until now?" "Because, Mom and Dad, you always have it tough because of my condition, right? Surgeries cost a lot of money, and you have to go back and forth between the hospital and home for me. Mirinda, for US." Knowing Mirinda was considerate of us made me feel inadequate as a parent. Why am I the only one like this? Tears fell again from Mirinda's eyes after she finished speaking. "I'm sorry, Mirinda. Despite being blameless, she's had a hard time at school. not just school. Miranda might continue to be seen strangely by others because of her condition. I blamed myself, feeling responsible for her suffering.
I'm sorry, Miranda. From now on, Mom promises to be by your side as much as possible to protect you. Even for busy Dad at work, I'll be with you.
I hugged Miranda again tightly. When I told Dennis after he came home, it's hard not being there when you're going through tough times. I've let you handle all the hardship alone, Dennis also blamed himself.
It can't be helped. I'll protect Miranda's heart, and you protect our livelihood. Let's protect Miranda together.
Yes, we should. We vowed again to protect our daughter. From that day, I quit my job at the apparel company and became a housewife. In 3rd grade, Miranda underwent her 4th surgery. While the first 3 surgeries were minor corrections, the 4th involved transplanting bone from her pelvis to her upper jaw. It was more extensive than before, but it made the distortion from her mouth to her nose less noticeable, making her look no different from other children. However, having bone removed from her pelvis made walking difficult for Miranda, forcing her into a wheelchair for a while. Still, Miranda would look at her face in the hand mirror and ask with a bright, radiant smile never seen before, "Hey, Mom. Do I look prettier now?" Seeing my daughter happy and smiling without feeling self-conscious made me happy too.
Yes, you're very pretty, Miranda.
I brushed her hair and spoke to her. After a while, Miranda began serious walking rehabilitation. She almost fell during the unfamiliar rehab, but when I tried to help, "Just watch, Mom," she scolded me. Holding onto the handrail, Miranda grimaced with each step, "This is nothing. My face looks proper pretty now." Lucky, right, never showing any signs of weakness. "Does it hurt? Are you okay?" I couldn't help but worry and wanted to support her physically.
"If you always support me, Mom, there's no point in rehab."
Miranda laughed shyly. As a result of her positive attitude towards rehab, the pain in her hips completely vanished, and she could walk on her own without needing crutches anymore. 2 years later, Miranda was in 5th grade. There were still scars on her lips, but they were hardly noticeable and less mentioned. It seems Miranda has grown to like looking at her face in the mirror. Upon waking up, she heads straight to the bathroom and faces herself in the mirror with a smile. She used to dislike even approaching a mirror. The memory of those times feels like a distant past, making me chuckle to myself.
"I wish I could see Dad."
Miranda sighed. Dennis has been on a work assignment far away. We sometimes communicate via video calls, but it's not the same as having him nearby.
Sherry said her family is going on an overseas trip. Frederick is going camping. Everyone seems so lucky.
Despite it being summer vacation, Miranda lamented not being able to go anywhere due to our circumstances. One day, while we were spending a holiday at home, the doorbell suddenly rang. "I'll get it." Miranda stopped her summer homework in the living room and headed to the entrance, as I was busy with household chores and couldn't leave them.
"What, Aunt again? You came back?"
I could hear Miranda's displeased voice.
"How rude. You came back? I'm your aunt, after all. Family can visit as many times as they want, right?"
Saying so, the visitor entered the house without waiting for Miranda's consent.
"Ah, it's cool here. Revived."
I poked my head out from the balcony and welcomed the guest half-heartedly. "Welcome, Ensley." The guest was Ensley, Dennis's sister. According to Dennis, after graduating from high school, Ensley worked as an office clerk at a small trading company but ended up quitting within 3 months after being reprimanded by a senior for taking too many days off and getting into a heated argument. Now, she's living back at home. Dad told me she doesn't even bother to look at job ads he shows her. Just throws them on the floor and spends all day playing video games. Dennis complained about Ensley's lack of motivation. Ensley just sat down on the sofa as if it were the most natural thing in the world. As Mirinda tried to return to her homework, Ensley, fanning her sweaty shirt front to catch some air, exclaimed, "It's so hot. This weather is absolutely crazy." Ensley loudly exclaimed, disregarding Mirinda, who was trying to study. When Mirinda frowned in annoyance, Ensley did not miss it. "Am I bothering you, niece?" she asked with a creepy smile, intentionally disturbing Mirinda. Mirinda just sighed without engaging, knowing from experience that arguing would only encourage Ensley to be more annoying.
"Mirinda, I'd like something cold."
"Auntie's thirsty," Ensley said in a cloying voice and hugged Mirinda. "Please stay away, it's hot." Mirinda pushed Ensley away with a calm voice as she tried to lean on her, and Ensley clicked her tongue.
"What's with you? No charm at all. Eleanor, don't you have something to drink?"
I took out coffee from the fridge, poured it into a cup, and handed it to Ensley.
"Could you keep it down a bit? Mirinda is studying."
I admonished Ensley in a low voice, though I knew it was futile.
"You know, I always wonder."
Ensley looked around the room and poked Mirinda's cheek with her finger, asking, "Why doesn't Mirinda study in her own room?" Seeing Mirinda swat her hand away, Ensley laughed as if amused. "To save on electricity," Mirinda answered irritably.
"Saving on electricity? So that's why you're scrimping? Mom isn't working, right? That's why you guys are poor."
Mirinda slammed her hand on the table in frustration.
"Don't compare me to someone who doesn't work despite being old enough." "Are you talking about me?" "Wow, Mirinda, that's harsh. Your mom doesn't work outside either. Always lazing around at home just like me, right?" "That's not true. Mom is busy being a housewife. She's always cooking, cleaning, doing laundry. There's a lot to do. She's not lazy like Aunt," Mirinda retorted with a firm stance. "Really? Even Mirinda is being cold to me? Listen, my parents are like, if you want to use the air conditioner so much, pay the high electricity bill yourself. Can you believe that? Living with family and they say that? It's your own fault for not working and just lazing around and playing in your room all the time." "Well, it's not like I can pay for that. Going to cafes costs money, department stores are far and a hassle. So in the end, the only place I can rely on is Mirinda's house." Despite Mirinda's reluctance, Ensley hugged her again. This is how Ensley would come over unannounced, trampling over our lives every time. Even though she's Dennis's sister, I couldn't bring myself to forcefully kick her out. When I consult Dennis, who's away on his own, he says, "Kick her out immediately. If it comes to it, calling the police is fine. But she's still family, and I couldn't bring myself to do that." Taking advantage of my inability to stand firm, Ensley has been getting increasingly bold lately. "Anyway, Eleanor, you've got it easy, right? Because you can just play around at home every day." "I'm not taking it easy at all." I snapped back at Ensley, irritated. After engaging more than I should have, I calmed down and realized I shouldn't have. Predictably, Ensley got even more encouraged. "It's fine to slack off, right? Just buy whatever you like from the grocery store for meals, and for cleaning, just quickly tidy up the places that catch the eye." "That's what I would do, LOL." She suggested I take shortcuts in my role as a housewife. "Don't compare me with Aunt. Besides, it's annoying because of her I can't concentrate on my studies. Can you just go home?"
Mirinda protested strongly. "Oh, scary." Ensley exaggeratedly shivered.
So, Mirinda, what have you been studying? Should I help you? I might be able to teach you addition or subtraction.
I've already learned that, thank you. Please, just go home. Oh. What's this? Your summer project isn't finished yet. Ensley peered over at Mirinda's planner. I remember those days. With summer projects, you never really know what to do, right? It's hard to find something you actually want to research. In that regard, Mirinda, I'm kinda envious.
What do you mean? Well, not many kids are born with such an interesting face like you. Why don't you compile something about that condition? It'd be easy, right? LOL. It's about yourself, so you wouldn't have to research much.
I couldn't stay silent at my sister-in-law's incredibly insensitive remark.
Enough, Ensley. There are things you should and shouldn't say, even if we're family. Oh, scary, scary. I was just stating the facts. If she compiles something about her interesting condition, everyone will be pleased, won't they?
Ensley is calling Mirinda's condition interesting. Laughing, without knowing how much pain and suffering Mirinda and we have gone through. Mirinda, don't worry about what such a person says. I grabbed Ensley's arm, trying to drag her out of the house with all my might. That's when Mirinda stood up slowly and said with a smile, "Don't worry, Mom. I've decided." In contrast to me, who was about to explode with anger, Mirinda was completely calm. Well then, Mirinda, I don't quite understand, but your mom seems really angry, so I'll leave. Ensley said without a shred of remorse, smirking creepily as she prepared to leave. I wanted to unleash my anger on her, but Mirinda pulled at the hem of my shirt, stopping me. You too, Mom, shouldn't worry about what that person says. Looking at the suddenly quiet entrance after Ensley left, Mirinda spoke. She must have some plan in mind. Thinking this, I managed to suppress my anger. 3 months passed. Mirinda, it's okay to relax a bit. Saying that, the national newspaper reporter eased the slightly tense expression on Mirinda's face. Dressed in new clothes bought for this day, Mirinda smiled with confidence. That's the spirit. You're doing great. Praised by the handsome reporter, Mirinda's cheeks flushed slightly. 3 months ago, I couldn't have imagined Mirinda being interviewed by a national newspaper. The interview took place in a small cafe in the neighborhood, which we had reserved. The owner, who I've known for a long time, whispered to me, "Hasn't Mirinda become quite beautiful?" Indeed, the last time the owner saw Mirinda was before her 4th surgery. As Mirinda's mother, always watching her closely, it was hard for me to notice. But acquaintances who saw her without a mask after a long time were often surprised. Mirinda's treatment had progressed so much that her facial structure from her mouth to her nose was indistinguishable from other children's. Of course, some surgery scars remained, but they were hardly noticeable unless pointed out. Let's take one last photo. Smile. Prompted by the reporter, Mirinda smiled broadly without her mask. 3 months ago, on the night Ensley left, Mirinda declared to me,
I've decided on my summer project theme. I want everyone to know about me. I'll do what Aunt suggested.
She didn't seem bothered by Ensley's words. In fact, she seemed more radiant than before.
Is that okay with you, Mirinda? I asked.
Laughing a little, Mirinda said, "Mom, you're always overprotective. I'm not the crybaby I used to be. This is something I've decided to do myself." Seeing my daughter so full of confidence, I felt reassured. All right, then I won't stop you. Go ahead as you think is best, Mirinda.
Okay, got it.
From that day, Mirinda began to confront her condition of cleft lip and palate again. Shortly after starting elementary school, she had been teased by classmates about the shape of her nose and mouth. Suffering in silence because she couldn't tell her parents. She compiled the numerous surgeries she underwent and the teasing into a booklet, including photos from those times. There's one photo that is particularly meaningful to me. It was taken the day Miranda first opened up to us about the mean things said at school. Although she protested, "No, don't take a picture," I took it anyway.
Why did you take a photo?
She protested tearfully, but I hugged her tightly. Someday, we'll look back at this day and laugh, Miranda. At the time, Miranda couldn't understand and just cried out of frustration. Afterward, we discussed why people hold such prejudices. We concluded that prejudice stems from ignorance. Indeed, cleft lip and palate is a rare condition, affecting 1 in 1,000 people. But with ongoing treatment, one's appearance can become indistinguishable from others. We hoped that more people knowing about the condition and its treatment would reduce the instances of patients being viewed strangely. That became our family's unified wish. In advancing her summer project, Miranda set up a special website and conducted a survey for children suffering from the same condition and their parents. This revealed that other families, like ours, were troubled and pained by prejudice. Good luck, Miranda. You're very brave. If there's anything we can do, just let us know. I realized Miranda had many supportive comrades suffering from the same condition. Mom, thank you for giving birth to me. Thank you for raising me. Because you supported me, I was able to get this far. Miranda whispered, looking at the photo. The hard worker is you, I replied. Miranda had undergone numerous surgeries since she was very young. Especially the 4th surgery, which involved transplanting bone from her pelvis to her upper jaw, was the most challenging, leaving her unable to walk on her own for a while, but she never complained. She is truly a strong child. Of course, I feel like hiding my face with a mask. But I've come to think that this unique aspect of mine could be considered cool. Miranda said confidently. A month after summer vacation ended, Miranda came home from school and said, "Look. My summer project was highly praised at school, and I was awarded this certificate." She showed me the certificate, breathless and sweaty from her excitement.
My friend said I was cool.
Miranda happily shared her school experiences. A month after that, a newspaper company contacted us for an interview.
I read the interview article. Miranda, you're amazing.
Miranda's article was published in a national newspaper, catching the eye of Dennis, who was on a work assignment. He immediately video called us.
If you were going to be published, you could have told me. I was just reading the newspaper when suddenly I see Miranda's face all over it. And I spit out the coffee I was drinking from surprise. It wouldn't have been fun if I told you beforehand. I wanted to see your reaction without saying anything first.
So, I fell for the surprise, huh? Dennis laughed heartily over the video call. Miranda peeked out and said, "Are you happy to see your daughter's face after so long, Dad?" "Well, yes. But, you really gathered courage to compile something about your condition, didn't you?" Then, Miranda's smile faded, and she answered seriously. "I presented it because I wanted to reduce the number of people who, like Aunt, say hurtful things out of ignorance about diseases and disabilities."
Ensley? Did she say something to you?
We revealed the hurtful things Ensley had said to Miranda during her summer visit.
That girl.
Dennis sighed. "I'll give her a piece of my mind." The next day, we received a call from Mael.
I read Miranda's article. It's amazing, Miranda. But I heard Ensley said terrible things. Dennis called me yesterday, and I was shocked.
Luke is furious. He's been saying he won't forgive Ensley since yesterday. I'm worried his blood pressure might go up. but Ensley really is trouble," Maëlle said, promising to make Ensley apologize soon. A few days later, Ensley came to visit as promised.
"Are you there? If you are, come out already."
She banged on the door so hard I worried it might break, not seeming like she came to apologize but rather irritated. When I went to answer, there stood Ensley, looking devilish.
"What are you doing on your own?"
She protested, not apologizing but complaining instead. I had no idea why Ensley was so angry. When I remained silent, thanks to your daughter stirring things up, I got yelled at by my parents and bro. Now I feel uncomfortable at home. "How are you going to take responsibility?" she demanded. Apparently, Ensley had been severely scolded by my in-laws and Dennis because of Miranda's project. But I thought it was all Ensley's fault. Unable to hold back my anger at Ensley's lack of remorse, I exploded.
"Enough, Ensley. If you're not here to apologize, please leave."
I finally let out the anger I had been holding back, even to Ensley, who kept repeating her arrogant attitude. For the first time, I openly protested, leaving Ensley momentarily taken aback.
"Whether you're my husband's sister or whoever, anyone who hurts my precious daughter is not family. Don't come to our house again. You're nothing but trouble." "What? Getting angry all of a sudden? Silly. Even though I came to apologize, you're kicking me out. Fine then. I'll tell the family you're a stubborn DIL, just remember that."
Miranda interjected while listening beside me. "Aunt, I'm recording our conversation, so lying is useless. It'll be found out soon anyway," she said, admonishing Ensley like a child who won't listen. "Oh well. I guess I'll forgive you just for today then." With those final words, Ensley left with a pale face.
"Ah, that feels so much better."
Now in 5th grade, Miranda seems more mature than ever to me. She never used to complain, not because she didn't want to but because she didn't want to worry us. But now, it's different. Miranda isn't holding back tears anymore. She doesn't even feel the need to cry because she's become so strong and resilient. Looking at Miranda's serene profile, I couldn't help but feel a bit reflective. Maybe I've been too worried about her. With the sole intention of not letting her feel lonely, I quit my job to always be there for her. But it seems Miranda is fine now. Without me realizing, she has grown up and surrounded herself with many strong allies. Lately, she's been bringing school friends home more frequently.
"What, is there something on my face?"
Miranda noticed my gaze and looked at me questioningly. "Yes, lots of happiness."
"What? That makes no sense."
Laughing at my response, Miranda seemed amused. Feeling her growth, I decided to rejoin the workforce at an apparel company I had been invited to rejoin. "Eleanor, I read the newspaper. Miranda did great, didn't she?" Every time my coworkers mentioned it, I calmly responded, "She probably doesn't think she did anything extraordinary. She just presented her life as it is." One evening, Miranda shared her future dreams with me.
"I want to become a doctor. To help children and families suffering from diseases and disabilities like mine. Facing myself through my summer project made me think that. And I've been thinking lately, there are people who can't run fast, those who struggle with studies. Tall people, short people. My condition is just another trait among those."
Hearing her aspirations, I felt hopeful for her future.
"Oh, and by the way, a boy in my class told me he likes me."
Miranda casually mentioned her dream and then shared this news. Reporting this to Dennis via video call, he panicked.
"What? Isn't it too early for her to be in a relationship? Hey, are you okay with this?"
"Calm down, my dear husband. I calmed down the frantically panicking Dennis. The fact that a boy confessed to Miranda probably means that the kids around her have stopped caring about her condition. As for Ensley, I heard she was kicked out by Dennis and the in-laws. Ensley, who had been lazing around at home every day without working part-time, finally decided to become independent after losing financial support. In reality, she had no choice but to do so. Now, she struggles with living alone in a small, old apartment, earning a little from part-time work. The wish Miranda had for her summer project, to reduce ignorant and hurtful comments about diseases and disabilities, is also my wish. Of course, 1 or 2 actions alone won't change the world. But that's exactly why we, who know the struggles and pain, must continue to spread the truth to the world. I vowed in my heart to continue watching over Miranda, ensuring her growth isn't hindered. Dennis has decided to return from his assignment. Dennis convinced his boss to allow him to work predominantly remotely. "I won't let you two feel lonely again," he said. "But then, you came back because you're worried Miranda might get a boyfriend, aren't you?"
"That's not the case,"
Dennis awkwardly responded. Anyway, we're back to living happily and closely as a family of 3. A family that's always full of laughter, our pride and joy. My name is Alice. I've been married for 8 years and have a 6-year-old daughter, Laura, and a 4-year-old son, Eddie. My husband Sam was a colleague at the same company. When I was assigned to the same team, I was supposed to support him, but being new to the job, I often ended up receiving his support instead. I was drawn to his work ethic and kindness. We had a successful project, and a party was thrown to celebrate. He was the main contributor to the success, and naturally, the star of the party. Amidst everyone's praises, he took my hand and said,
"I really appreciate Alice's support. This success is partly thanks to her."
I responded, "I haven't done anything significant. Thank you though." But I was thrilled that he recognized my efforts. As the party ended and everyone was leaving, he and I ended up being alone together because we were heading in the same direction. It's odd to say this here, but I'd like to date you. I have feelings for you. Surprised and overjoyed by his sudden confession, I was filled with happiness. It was because I had also fallen for him. 6 months into our relationship, he proposed to me. The proposal came unexpectedly on our way back from watching a movie and having dinner together. I was so overwhelmed with happiness that tears came to my eyes. Why not in the restaurant we just left, but on this street? But then I remembered that he asked me out on the street too, and I couldn't help but laugh through my tears. He was a bit surprised by my reaction, but after hearing my explanation, he apologized saying, "Sorry for the lack of delicacy." We decided to get married and started making various preparations. Among them, greeting his parents was important. Actually, both of my parents had already passed away. My mother died of an illness when I was in junior high, and my father died in a sudden traffic accident the month I started working. Being an only child, I suddenly found myself alone. So, I felt both joy at the prospect of gaining new parents and anxiety about what these 2 people I had yet to meet would be like. According to him, his father Jack is strict but kind and is someone he respects greatly. Jack's also still working energetically as a director of a trading company. As for his mother Emily, a housewife who always supported Dad, and who loved and raised me with care. Sam shared that with a bit of shyness. I was nervous when I greeted them. Jack said smiling, "I'm happy to have you in our family. If my son has chosen you, then I'm relieved." Emily also smiled saying so. We continued to discuss various things about the wedding and our future home as a group of 4. After the meal, while helping Emily with the dishes in the kitchen, just the 2 of us, she suddenly said, "I feel sorry that you have no parents, but I wonder if such a girl is really suitable to be Sam's wife." It came out of nowhere. She lost the friendliness I had felt until then and feeling belittled. I was stunned and didn't know how to respond. While washing the dishes, she continued to express her dissatisfaction towards me. Her calm tone seemed to reveal her true feelings, and I couldn't bear it anymore. She never showed any sign of belittling me or speaking ill of me in front of others. The huge gap in her attitude was terrifying to me. Nevertheless, the wedding was grand affair. Sam said, "It's a once-in-a-lifetime event for a woman," and planned it for me. Jack agreed with his idea and helped make it happen. Many people attended, including our company colleagues and Jack's business associates. That made it a lively ceremony. Sam and I had agreed to continue working until we had children. However, it seemed that Emily disapproved of it. When I was alone with her in the dressing room before the wedding, she whispered in my ear, "So, you're continuing your job. A wife should support her husband." Poor Sam. "I quit my job right away to support my husband." She said that with a tone of sarcasm. There was a staff member from the venue in the dressing room to help us prepare, so I think Emily was discreet for their sake. I felt a strong will in her to never reveal her true nature or true feelings to anyone. After the wedding, we rented a roomy house close to my in-laws' house. It was a large property for just the two of us. "Let's choose a house with enough room for our future children." It was the room that Sam had decided on. After a delightful honeymoon, we began our life in our new home and decided to invite my in-laws over for dinner. Upon seeing the new home, Jack said, "It's a splendid house." He highly praised it. Emily just smiled and agreed with him. Based on past experiences, I could imagine what Emily was thinking and felt creeped out. After dinner, they left thoroughly pleased. I felt somewhat exhausted and just sat in a chair, zoning out. Sam noticed and asked what was wrong, but it was difficult to explain, so I responded, "I'm just a little tired." Late that night, there was a call on my cell phone. When I looked at the screen, it was from Emily. I hesitated for a moment, and it took me a little longer to answer the phone. "You took a while to answer. Were you planning not to pick up?" "No, that's not it," I said. "However, I wonder." She coldly responded, "Most of the dishes today were delivered. It's clear you're taking the easy way out. The dishes you made weren't impressive and they were bland. I'm worried about Sam's diet." She started by criticizing my cooking and then complained about everything from how the room was organized to the interior design. Just listening to her was tiring. Since there had been no chance for us to be alone today, she used the phone to express her feelings. That night, due to the exhaustion, I couldn't fall asleep and it affected my return to work the next day. Since our new home was close to my in-laws, Emily frequently visited. Sam was simply happy that his mother was coming over, but for me, even our precious days off weren't restful. I knew Emily's ways all too well, so I made sure to act smartly to avoid being alone with her as much as possible. When Sam was with us, she was a pleasant mother-in-law. But knowing her drastic changes, even that felt eerie and frightening to me. Whenever I acted to avoid being alone with her, there would inevitably follow a barrage of phone calls. Each call would last over 30 minutes, filled with complaints and snide remarks that left me exhausted. If I tried to ignore them, she'd sense it and become even angrier. I was at a loss about what to do. 2 years into our marriage, we were blessed with a child. Sam was overjoyed. When we went to inform my in-laws, Jack's happiness rivaled Sam's. Even Emily seemed genuinely happy at the prospect of holding a grandchild, but her true feelings became clear later. I always made sure not to be alone with Emily, but this time Jack and Sam were pulled away for work-related calls, leaving us alone. "As expected," she said. "Really, it took you 2 years because you kept working after marriage. I always thought you were a useless wife, but you just barely made it this time." It seemed she was always displeased with me continuing my job. "Emily, now that we've been blessed with a child, and as I've discussed with Sam, I'll be quitting my job soon to focus on parenting and the household." I explained her, but her complaints continued. The return of Jack and Sam from their calls thankfully ended the conversation. About 5 months later, I resigned from my job. On my last day, the bouquet I received from my colleagues was the most delightful thing. 3 months after that, I safely gave birth to a baby girl. It was an easy birth for my first child, and I was able to leave the hospital early to start our new life as a family of 3. We soon invited my in-laws over to introduce them to our daughter, Laura. Jack looked at his granddaughter with joy. When he offered his little finger, Laura gripped it tightly, a natural reflex for babies, but he was delighted. I remembered Sam doing the same thing a couple of days ago, skipping around happily. I thought Emily would surely be satisfied holding her adorable grandchild, but I was naive. That night, I received another call from her.
It's fine that you have a grandchild, but why a girl? The first one should have been a boy.
She blamed me for not giving birth to a male heir, despite Sam being happy with our child regardless of gender.
I don't want to be criticized for something like that.
Feeling like our child's worth was being denied, I finally stood up to her. She was angry at my rare resistance and became even more sarcastic. It felt like my child was being ridiculed, and I couldn't take it anymore, so I finally told Sam about it. I had never really spoken to him about Emily before, and he seemed quite surprised. He also said,
"I can't stand the way Mom talks down to Laura."
And he apologized to me.
"I'm sorry for all the trouble you've been through."
He promised that from now on, we would keep some distance from Emily. After that, our interactions with her decreased, and so did the harassment from her. Perhaps because I felt more secure in parenting and my life with Sam, we were blessed with another child when Laura turned 2. Then, our son was born. Sam's joy at that time was even greater than before.
"Did you prefer having a boy?"
I asked.
"That doesn't matter. I'm just so happy that Laura has a little brother."
He smiled. We reported the birth of our son Eddie to my in-laws and showed them his face. Jack was overjoyed just like Sam and congratulated us on having 2 children. As for Emily, it was the same as when Laura was born. On the phone, she said,
"You finally gave birth to a boy. At least you've been somewhat useful now. But I wonder if someone like you can properly raise an important heir. The daughter doesn't seem to be raised well either."
Even at a young age, Laura seemed to sense the negative aura emanating from Emily. She was very fond of Jack, but she didn't get close to her much. That seemed to be a source of dissatisfaction for Emily. Ironically, the root cause was her own behavior, yet she seemed oblivious to this fact. Unable to bear her criticizing my children, I told Sam about it. When I played a recording of my conversation with Emily as evidence, he sighed and shook his head. We decided once again to keep our distance from her. Peaceful days returned to me. Time passed, and Laura turned 6, while Eddie became 4 years old. One time, Jack had to go on a long business trip overseas. The company was focusing on expanding its business and increasing dealings with foreign partners, and he was going as the person in charge of the initiative. A week after Jack left, Emily suddenly visited our house. Moreover, she brought a lot of baggage with her. When I asked what was going on, she said,
"Jack is away now and I was bored, so I decided to come and stay. I'll be in your care. Besides, it looks like you might be getting busier, right? I'll help out around the house for a bit."
Actually, just the other day, "Can you help me with my work?" A friend had asked me. The friend owns an interior shop and suddenly one of her employees had quit, leaving her short-staffed.
"Just until I can find a replacement,"
she said. I was considering the offer since my children were still young. I was puzzled about how Emily knew about it, but I was more shocked by her sudden decision to move in. Unable to send her away, I let Emily into the house, and she quickly started organizing her belongings. That evening, when Sam came home, I told him about it. He was also surprised by Emily's sudden arrival. She knew about the work request because Sam had told her. He had accidentally mentioned it while contacting her for a different matter. The thought of living with her was dizzying to me. I asked Sam,
"Can you talk to Emily and get her to go home?"
But he said,
"It's only for a short while, and it'll make it easier for you to take up your friend's request."
So, Emily's stay was decided. I was relieved that I could go to work and be away from her, but I was terribly worried about leaving the children in her care. I felt like the children were being held hostage by her, leaving me restless. The kids talked to me about their interactions with Emily. It seemed that she was only paying attention to Eddie. Perhaps because he's the heir, Laura said.
"It's sad."
And shed tears. Her sarcasm continued, pushing me to the edge. Combined with the fatigue from the unfamiliar job, I was nearing my limit. Seeing my distress, Sam listened to me. He said,
"I can't overlook this anymore,"
and gave me some advice. Just like before, when I recorded my call with Emily,
"Start collecting evidence,"
he had instructed. He handed me a voice recorder and a video camera. The next day, I began recording all of Emily's sarcasms. I set up the video in the living room and carried the voice recorder during conversations with her. Although her attacks continued, The thought of standing up to her gave me mental strength. As the evidence accumulated, I was strangely surprised by how much could be gathered in such a short period. Finally, she demanded that I divorce Sam and leave the house. The nerve of a parasite dictating terms in my family's home brought me to my breaking point. I discussed with Sam and decided to take action.
Get out!
When Emily said, "Understood, then it's goodbye." Hearing that, thinking she had one.
Finally, even someone as stupid as you understands. But what a terrible wife, leaving your children behind.
She laughed and said, "No, it's you who will be leaving. That's why I said goodbye." Hearing it,
"What are you talking about?"
Ignoring her anger, I pulled out my cell phone and made a call. Once the person on the other end answered, I handed the phone to her. Her face visibly paled as she took the call. The person on the line was Jack, who was overseas.
"What are you doing, leaving our home unattended like this? Isn't it a wife's duty to protect her home? You've been harassing Alice? What is the meaning of this?"
Unable to respond to his words, Emily filled with anger. She began to sweat profusely, and her eyes turned vacant. I had asked Sam to gather substantial evidence, which we then sent to Jack overseas. In today's age, whether someone is overseas or anywhere else, data can be sent with just a click.
"I've seen the terrible things you've done. I won't hear any excuses."
Among the evidence was a video of Emily taking money from my wallet. I had been worried about my money disappearing mysteriously, but I never thought it was her. Jack told her,
"Go back home immediately and reflect on your actions.
Moreover,
I'll be returning home temporarily and we'll have a talk then."
Saying so, he ended the call. After hanging up, Emily quickly packed her things in a daze and fled back to her own home. Later, when Jack returned temporarily, he lectured her and even considered divorce, completely breaking her down. After the incident, she never interfered with me again. Laura and Eddie said,
"Mommy would never leave us. Grandma doesn't understand anything."
"That's right. I would never abandon my precious family." Sam stood by me. I am resolved to cherish this family always. Thus, a peaceful life came to our family of 4.